All right. Council, please come to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mandy, can you please call the roll?
Here.
Raverhorst. Here. Butler.
Here.
Carlstone.
Here.
Hopkins.
Here.
And Stryland.
Here.
All right, can I get a motion for approval of the tentative agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Miranda Horse, who was that, Hopkins? Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Raverhorst.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
And Stryland.
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
Butler.
Yes.
Motion passed. This time we have opportunity for a public forum. Anyone wishing to address council regarding any agenda item, and the only agenda item we have tonight is a budget discussion. Please state your name and address. Try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Where are we doing this at? If we need, over here?
In front of the board there, we'll be fine. We'll get you.
It'll pick it up, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll take the lines, Mike.
Okay. All right, seeing none, we will move on. Start with our fiscal year 24-25 budget and capital improvement program. Mike, I hope you got a lot of water. You got a lot of talking to do.
All righty. Well, thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening to talk about the 2025 fiscal year budget. And just for those watching in home with Pella Fiber and those in attendance, when we talk about the 2025 budget, we're talking about the fiscal year that will start on July 1st of this year and will end on June 30th, 2025. And we'll go ahead and get started with it. And as in years past, we've given a pretty detailed presentation at the start of these meetings. We've tried to, I'd say, spread out the presentation throughout the departments this evening. Tonight's presentation will really be focused on the general fund. Tomorrow night, when we talk about the utilities, it'll be geared towards utilities as far as the overview presentation. So when we look at the city's overall budget and what's being proposed with the fiscal year 2025 budget, we have expenditures or total revenue of $69.8 million. Total expenditures is $69.5 million. And we're projecting an increase in reserves of just shy of $300,000. But we could get into some of the details when we'll be discussing throughout the presentation this evening, so I won't dive into the overall details of this as well, because it's really dependent upon the funds, and we'll be getting into the details as we go through the presentation this evening. But let's go ahead, Mandy, if we could, please. This may be a little bit more easier to digest than a page full of numbers. When we talk about the city's revenue highlights, a couple things to point out. Usually what happens whenever you talk about city budgets, property taxes is always one of the key items as far as discussion, gets a lot of attention both at the state level and also at the citizen level. But when we look at our revenue source and look at property taxes, we're just shy of $8.8 million in property taxes that we have here. Most of the city's revenue sources that we have for the budget is with utility revenues at just over $26.4 million. And as you can see, we are proposing this next year to have bond proceeds of $15.6 million. That's an increase over the current year, and it's tied to what's being proposed for the capital improvement projects that will be going throughout the presentation as well. Special revenue funds that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about tomorrow night, which would be the city's local option funds, as well as our road use tax funds, $3.5 million. So Mandy, let's go ahead, please. As far as capital, as far as the 2025 expenditure highlights that we have here, overall, once again, we're right at $69.5 million. Big items for the city, anytime you talk about the city's budget and operating budget, would be the compensation and benefits at $15.1 million. Operating expenditures, this would be the department's operating budgets on there. And keep in mind, this also includes the city's utilities at $23.2 million. And once again, we're proposing a significant capital improvement program, not only for 2025, but also over the 5-year period of time that the capital improvement program is being proposed, and that's through year 2029. I believe overall at the city's capital improvement program, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of right around $82 million that's being proposed with this budget. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, before we get into the details and start talking about an overview of the proposed rates for 2025, I'd like to just briefly mention that we have some factors that are influencing not only the current year's budget, but in our projections when we project out for the city. And it's very important to understand when the city of Pella performs its budget and goes through the budgetary process, we never look at just 1 year. The general fund that we're going to be talking about mainly tonight is being forecasted over a period of 3 years on that as well. And so when we look at these matters that are basically, in fact, have had a big influence on the city's budget, not only for 2025, I would say that this is going to be something that's going to be here to stay on the foreseeable future. And let me pick these off one at a time, and we have a detailed explanation of each one of these. One of the bigger items that, in putting together this budget for council's consideration this evening, that I found that was one of the more challenging items for the city was simply in our construction projects and the carryover from existing projects that have been in the capital improvement project. What's happened to the departments and with the construction inflation that we're facing is most of our construction projects have went up 20 to 25% on it. And that may not sound like a big deal, but when you start talking about CIP budgets of the tune of $25 million, that adds up in a hurry. The other thing that we've noticed in addition to the construction environment that we are facing is interest cost. Right around 2022, maybe it was late 2021, we were issuing general obligation debt of 1.6%. For bond issues that we have factored in with this current year budget that we'll be discussing this evening, we have an interest rate of 3.6%. So if you want to look at it from a financing standpoint, this is almost a double whammy. We have the higher project costs that are going up somewhere between that 15 to 25% for most of the projects included in the city's budget. And then in addition, at the same time, interest rates have increased from 1.6% up to 3.6%. So if you wanted to look at it from a financing standpoint, you're able to finance less for the same dollar amount, but your costs are going up. And so that's a very, very challenging aspect to this budget. As we talk about the city's general fund this evening, I would say one of the bigger items is property tax reform. And it's not only the new property tax legislation that the state recently passed, it's the past property tax cuts that the state of Iowa has passed over the last 10 years. And without getting into a whole lot of detail on it, as there's been probably 3 to 4 property tax legislations in the last 10 years, each time the state passes property tax legislation, the cities are promised across the state of Iowa a backfill amount to help offset the impact to the municipal governments. What's happened in each one of those cases is the backfill amounts expire sooner than projected or decreases sooner than expected. For this next year, when we look at 2025, we have $46,000 less in municipal assistance from the state of Iowa from previous property tax cuts. And the main batch of property tax reimbursements from the state of Iowa, Brian, I believe is set to expire in 2027 on it as well. So you have the actual funding decreases from the state of Iowa. In addition, for this next year, we also have property tax legislation that really, when you look at it and it boils down on how it applies to the city of Pella, when we get into the property tax rate, the city's proposed property tax rate for next year we're proposing is $10.75. Our main operating rate of that is what's called the general fund operating levy rates, I believe is what we've always referred to it. That's right at $8.10. That's the maximum amount that you can levy under the state of Iowa. What the state has done is they put growth limitations on the amount of that fund that can actually be taxed as far as taxable increases on your valuation. So the key takeaway is the majority of the city's property tax revenues that we generate on an annual basis is going to be limited under a state formula to where it's about a 2% allowable increase on an annual basis. That may not sound like a lot, but from a challenging aspect, when we start talking about employee compensation, pension cost, and also when you get into just operating and inflation, if you're capped at your main revenue source for the general fund at 2%, and your costs are going up somewhere to 4.5% to 5%, it doesn't take very long for it to become a very challenging economic environment for the general fund on it. So please keep that in mind. The other item that we have, and this is something that's relatively new to not only Pella, but is happening throughout the state of Iowa, and there's numerous cities that have been impacted by this. Our insurance carrier, which is EMC, has recently informed the cities across the state of Iowa some pretty significant property insurance increases. And specifically what they've stated is over the last 3 to 4 years, they've experienced significant losses, and they're looking to minimize their risk involved with insuring municipal buildings. The key thing that they've done, and it's our understanding this really is attributed to the 2020-2021 derecho that happened in eastern Iowa. What they've stated is they've looked at the risk associated with providing property insurance for older buildings. And specifically, they're looking at older buildings that are over 50 years of age that have not had updated electrical or plumbing systems or in need of roof repairs. And the key takeaway is for those buildings is getting more difficult to find property insurance on those buildings. We're okay liability-wise, but property insurance is getting to be an issue and a challenge. And the general fund that we're going to be reviewing this evening, I believe the numbers that we have as far as a premium increase is over $200,000 for property insurance for the general fund. And what I would say is it applies to both the community center and the memorial building. Please keep in mind this is getting to be a challenging environment to insure older buildings. And realistically, the renovations that are planned for both of these buildings, if they're going to continue to maintain property insurance on them, those renovations probably need to occur within the next 24 months, would be staff's estimation, or at least address what the insurance company is concerned about, which are roofs, electrical systems, and plumbing systems as well. So as we review the budget, please keep that in mind that these three factors have had a significant impact on the city's FY25 budget. And I would also state that for the foreseeable future, these factors will continue to play. There'll be an issue on a go-forward basis as well. So Mandy, let's go ahead, please. Now, as far as the overall property tax levy, mixed feelings on this one, as council's aware. We've been very fortunate at Pella, and we've maintained our property tax rate, have been able to maintain our property tax rate for the past 22 years at $10.20. I would tell you that we have one of the lowest property tax rates in the state of Iowa, and even with this proposed increase at $10.75, we still have one of the lowest increases in the state of Iowa. The issues that we've had with the property taxes, and we got a section on this that we're going to go into detail on why is the increase, but you've heard about a few of them already, and I'm going to save the rest of them for later on in the presentation. Also associated with this budget, and we'll be covering this tomorrow night during the utility rate review section, we have a proposed increase in solid waste fees. And this is mainly attributed to increases that we paid the carrier for this current year. If you recall, Midwest Sanitation is the carrier for the city of Pella for our solid waste fund. We awarded them with a 4.8% increase this year. Under the terms of their contract and what's being proposed for next year is a 2% increase that we would have. So the rates that we're paying to the carrier is going up for their operator is about 6.8%. We're proposing an increase of about 10%, which is an extra $2 a month for the typical residential customer in the city of Pella, just shy of that. Now, as far as the proposal for all other utility rates, we are proposing to hold the line on all other utilities, and we'll be going into detail on utility rates tomorrow night as well. This evening, we're also going to be talking about proposed increases in aquatic and development fees as well, and doing a brief review. But if council is aware, anytime that we propose program-related fee increases, we always conduct separate work sessions for those matters. So the items that we're going to be talking about tonight is a very brief overview of those proposed increases. We'll schedule a policy and planning session and get into the detail on both of those in the future as well. So Mandy, let's go ahead, please. And as we stated, with the property tax rate at $10.20, we are proposing a 55-cent levy increase. And if you wanted to look at it as your property tax levy, just oversimplify things, is composed of two matters. It's your operating levy and your debt service levy. We're proposing to hold the line on the debt service levy and increase the operating levy by 55 cents. And it's really attributed to three things. First of all, we talked about the property insurance going up $200,000 in the city's general fund. That was a big item for us. The second item is when we look at state reductions in service and their municipal assistance, $46,000 is a big deal to the general fund on it, and that was another contributing factor. The third item, and it's something that we've been, basically struggling with, and from a financial standpoint, I'll state struggling with, for the last couple of years, and it's even exceeded before the city even took over the service, is funding of the Pella ambulance. The Pella ambulance that we're going to be reviewing this evening has an operating subsidy of $598,000. We also have in the budget a proposed replacement of an ambulance for next year of another $210,000. And from my perspective, I don't want this message to seem mixed. The ambulance is an essential service. And what the City Council did on July 1st, 2022, taking over that service, I commend the City Council. I think it was the right decision. I still do. But the reality is we absorbed the ambulance at that time under the existing rates that we had for the general fund. We did not increase property taxes, and we've been providing the services to the citizens. When you look at the environment that we're facing, keep in mind the construction inflation that we're facing. Keep in mind that we're facing state funding cuts and property tax legislation on this as well. And when you can throw those all in, and also with the property insurance, those are the factors that are leading to the proposed 55 cents in the operating levy, and that is the proposed increase for next year. Now, to briefly cover this, I want to address this and make sure that we're absolutely very clear on this matter. Is for some time, in fact, last year a big discussion was, well, there's proposed essential services tax in Marion County. That may or may not happen. I personally am an advocate for it, because when you look at the Pella ambulance, the ambulance not only serves the citizens of Pella, but it also serves the 4 townships that abut Pella and the city of Lighton. In Marion County, for those townships, they are limited to their fire levy to support the ambulance, and that's been an issue for them, and we've been trying to work with the townships in providing services. And I think from the city of Pella standpoint, our concern was, if you call 911, we want to make sure someone shows up. I personally believe that the ambulance provided excellent service before we took them over, and I think we still provide excellent service. In fact, I'm very proud of our ambulance department. But we've tried to work with our neighbors in providing services so we didn't leave them with a coverage gap on it. If an essential services tax could be conducted and an election could be held in March of 2025, those revenue proceeds from the new tax would be available to the city on July 1st, 2025. So that's next fiscal year. It takes 60% for a referendum to pass. In looking at next year's budget, if an essential services tax is passed, I think we'll have to have a discussion at the council level if we are in a position to decrease our operating levy because of this property tax increase for next year. If it passes, could we decrease our levy rate so the citizens of Pella are not double taxed for this on it? That's an option with this budget. We intend to have those discussions next year. So what you're hearing me say is if it was a guarantee and we knew that the tax would pass next year, might be a different story. We might be able to plug the gap, but the truth is it's been difficult to get a referendum even up to vote for consideration of a vote, let alone passage. And I think the group's made a lot of good progress over the last, I'd say, 60 days on the matter. I'm optimistic that there's going to be a referendum next spring, but there's no guarantee with that. And when you look at our proposed tax rate at 1075, one of the items that we have to consider is also the capital improvement program for the city of Pella. Tonight we're going to be going through a lot of projects that you're going to see proposed general obligation bond issue behind as far as a funding source. Every time you see the word general obligation bond issue, you could think of one other word that's as quickly associated with it. That's called credit rating. For every bond issue that we propose, we have to undergo a credit rating at the city of Pella. And so what we're trying to do with the budget is we're trying to present a financial plan that does not jeopardize the city's finances, keeps our reserves where they need to be for our bond rating. And when we look at it, we believe the tax is justified, or the tax rate is justified under the circumstances. So again, it's entirely due to operations, ambulance, property tax, insurance, state funding cuts are the 3 items for the reason for the 55-cent increase. Now, before I open it up to questions on this from the council, let me quickly go over the debt service. Mandy, if we can go to slide 8, please. Now, what we have in the budget is for next year, you'll notice that this budget is very heavy into capital improvement projects, both from an infrastructure standpoint, and I would also say from a quality of life, amenity standpoint as well. The projects that we have listed up on the big board total $8.6 million. All of these projects will be occurring if council proceeds with these projects at various points of this year. And how projects typically work with us. As projects occur, then the bond issue occurs for those projects. Typically, the debt service is 1 year behind when the bond issue is issued. So if the bonds are issued this year for $8.6 million, the debt service takes effect for FY 25-26. So for all these projects that we're going to be reviewing this evening, totaling $8.6 million, if we were to proceed with all of them, and we do not have, and let's say the property valuations come into where we think they're going to be at in 2020, for next 2026 or fiscal year 2026, the debt service levy could increase another $1.15 on it as well. And so we think that's an item that we want to make sure we bring to council's attention. And that as we discuss these projects, we also talk about the financial significance of these projects that are being proposed that are listed up here. But again, as we go through the CIP, we'll make sure that we mention these projects and we have a discussion as we go through the individual department budgets on this as well. Mandy, I'm forgetting what I have as far as my next slides on property tax. Yeah, okay. We just got a few slides and then we'll open it up for questions on property tax. Key item is the city's property tax rate is going from 10.20 or proposed to go up to 10.75 if council were to approve it. The chart that you see on the big board is for comparable cities across the state of Iowa, and the takeaway is the average rate without PELA in all these cities is just shy of $16 for their property tax rate. From our standpoint, when you look at the city's tax rate on it, we feel it's very, very reasonable compared to our peers throughout the state of Iowa. Most of these communities are right around 10,000 in size, but I would tell you, you could go line us up against any community in the metro on here, and I'm talking about the Des Moines metro or bigger cities as well. We rank very comparably to those. In fact, to just about any city in the state of Iowa. I feel our rate is still very, very good at 10.75, and it ranks very well throughout the state of Iowa, even with the increase. So let's go ahead. Mandy? Okay, before we start talking about switching gears on the operational side, is there any questions on property taxes? This won't be the last chance you get a chance to ask questions on this, by the way. Okay.
Is that $1.15 on top of the 10.75?
Yes.
I was just curious, the first slide showed last year's budget, which we budgeted for a $500,000 decrease. Do you have a projection of where reality is going to be?
Yeah, we think we're going to beat this 511 this year on the decrease. We usually, I mean, we've had a track history of always beating the estimate. We're going to beat this year as well. And we look at it from Brian and I's standpoint. It's nice to look at the overall estimate. We're going to go through the fund by fund pro formas this evening and also tomorrow night of the major funds. But we think we're going to come in under that 511 on it as well. So. Okay, so switch gears and start talking about personnel. Now overall, the proposed budget that we're considering this evening and tomorrow night has personnel expenditures projected at just over $15.1 million. And for the compensation, there's two elements for city employees as far as the compensation. One is commonly referred to as the wage adjustment, and then we also have what's called the merit adjustment. Now, the merit adjustment is commonly referred to as a step increase. Step increase is about 3%. If council were to approve this budget, we're proposing a 2% increase to the wage adjustment and also step increases for next year. The total amount of compensation that we are projecting increase for the city employees is just over $362,000. Now with this, most city employees for next year will receive right around a 5% compensation increase on this as well. When we look at it from a competitive standpoint and a vacancy standpoint, we just went through a wage analysis last year, a compensation study rather, last year. We feel good where the compensation system is at right now, but I would also tell you that it's very important when we look at the overall increase of 5% we think is appropriate under the circumstances. So again, it's an additional $362,000 this year. As far as the new positions that we have planned, there's only one, and that's in the police department. If you recall, during our last council meeting, we approved a grant with crisis intervention for a crisis intervention officer. Position's 100% funded through a grant through the police department. So even though we have one additional police officer, it's 100% funded through a grant as well. The other item that I want to make sure, and we're going to be talking about as we go through the ambulance this evening, is we're going to be proposing an operational assessment for the Pella Community Ambulance. And the reason for this is, when we look at the ambulance on it, we can tell you that calls are up. Chief Greg, and I might be a little bit off, but I think we're approaching 2,300 runs, 22 to 2,300.
We should be close to that.
Yeah, right there. If you were to look back 10 years ago, that number was 1,300. Based on their calls and their geographical service area, the area that at least I'm struggling, and I'll admit it, is if we look at what should their staffing be. And like I said, it's attributed to two things. How many calls are you going out on? And how big is your geographical area that you're serving? If we were to show you a map of the Pella Community Ambulance on there, again, keep in mind they not only serve the city of Pella, but they serve the 4 townships that abut Pella, and they serve the city of Lighton. So if I get my geographical boundaries correct, they're almost over. They are over to Highway T14 to the west. To the east, the city of Lighton. They go down to Highway 92, darn near to the south. And to the north, it's just right at the Jasper County line. That's a big geographical area for the Pella Community Ambulance. The other item that's really an influence on our staffing is transfers for Pella Regional Hospital. And when you factor in the big geographical area, the hospital transfers, and then just the call volume that's increasing, and keep in mind, we do have an aging demographics that we are serving on it. We are getting more and more calls with the ambulance on this as well. When you factor those 3 things in, it's difficult to state, well, how many employees should they have? Is it time for the 4th ambulance? And so from a manpower standpoint, what we're hoping to articulate is what is the ultimate goal and what is the ultimate size that the Pella Community Ambulance needs to be to meet their current service levels and also serve this geographical area. Now, from a financial standpoint, the other aspect to this is we want to be able to articulate the cost of transfers and the cost of serving areas outside of Pella. What we have involved in this budget is a proposed fee increase that would maintain the status quo for the townships, but we would also recommend that we give them notice on July 1st, 2025, actually July 1st, 2025, that the rates will be going up on it. And that's irrespective if essential services passes, you'll take that into consideration. But if essential services doesn't pass, again, right now I believe there's somewhere between 11 and 17 cents that they're levying for the ambulance. And looking at the essential service levy rates, what we've talked about as far as the tax overall, it's at 50 cents on it. So those are items that we'll have to discuss, but we think it's a very good idea that if we're going to be continuing to serve this area in the foreseeable future, that we get a handle on the service level needs and what the personnel it takes to actually serve that area as well. So we're going to propose the operational assessment. We'll talk more about that during the ambulances budget as well. Let's go ahead, please, Mandy. As far as full-time employees, there's a history over the past 10 years that you see, and you can see over the past 10 years, we went from 90 to 124. And the big items that we've had is we've started 3 operations that we weren't involved with 10 years ago. We've started a new telecommunications utility. We've taken over the Pella Community Ambulance, and we are also now operating the Boss London Golf Course. And that's the reason for the increase that we have up to 124 is those 3 departments that we have. Let's go ahead, please, Mandy. And now, as far as the city's capital improvement plan from FY25 through FY29, overall the plan is just over $82 million. Some of the items, the big ticket, not the big ticket, but the highlights that we have throughout here, we're going to be spending this evening. We're going to talk about the city's long-term facility plan that's being proposed. Exciting project. I'm very excited. And the electric utilities AMI, and we're going to be talking about that tomorrow night. That's advanced meter infrastructure for the city. Public safety vehicles that's included in this plan is over $3.1 million. That would be police, fire, and the ambulance. And as far as streets that are included in the plan over 5 years, we're at $17.8 million. So there are significant infrastructure projects involved with this budget as well. So overall, again, the plan totals just over $82 million over the 5 years. Mandy, let's go ahead, please. Now, you may be asking, what does this all mean to the typical resident in Pella? And this is our best estimation if council were to approve the proposed property tax increase and also the solid waste increase. We believe overall that citizens, as a result of these increases, would be paying for the typical home in Pella roughly $91 more. in annual taxes and fees to the city of Pella than they were in this current year. And again, those attributed to the proposed property tax rate increase as well as a solid waste fee increase. Mandy, let's go ahead, please. Now, before we start getting into the department presentations, I wanted to say this is going to be an interactive session over the next 2 nights. And I also think it's important that council understands at the end of these presentations, I'm going to circle back. And these are the questions I'm going to be asking the council on. And it'll be similar to what we've done in the past. If there's any issues, concerns, anything that would cause you to vote no during the city's budget hearing that is on April 16th, we want to stop the process, talk about it, and make sure that we have a clear understanding on the path forward. The first question I'm going to ask for at the end of the session tomorrow night, are you supportive of the city's proposed property tax increase up to $10.75? The next question I'm going to ask is, are you supportive of the solid waste increase by 10%? Then we'll dive into the utilities as far as maintaining existing rates for all other utility services. We'll talk about the addition of the 1 proposed police officer position for next year. We'll make sure we're all in agreement on the need for an assessment of the Pella Community Ambulance. And then we'll also dive into the compensation increases or proposed compensation increases for city staff as well. We'll do a very brief overview of the operating budgets and a very brief review of the capital improvement plans. And then the last item I'm going to ask is, again, keep in mind, budgetary sessions are for planning purposes. Any project that's listed in the capital improvement project will require separate authorization by the Pella City Council. What we're going to focus on with the long-term facility plan is the budgetary allocation for both the indoor rec center and the community center as well. And again, just as similar to what's been done in the past, if there's any concerns, questions, that's an item that we want to make sure we discuss at the time before we move on to our hearing on April 16th. So, Mr. Mayor, I believe that concludes my portion of the presentation before we get into the department presentations. If there's any questions for me before we dive into the fire department this evening, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Questions, council? All right, let's move on.
Okay.
Forge ahead.
I believe we have Chief Bogards here. Yep, all right. Start off with the general fund highlight. I have one additional slide. This is the financial overview for the city's general fund. And what we have here projected is actually, as you can see with the general fund, and Mr. Mayor, according to your question, what I think what we have is we're above estimates right now for the city's general fund. We're projecting that we're going to be at a fund balance of $4.4 million over this next year for the current fiscal year that's going to end on June 30th, 2024. That's an increase of over 4.2 this current year. Next year, we have a slight increase budgeted for the city's general fund. However, I also want to throw caution, and this is a kind of an early warning system that we have out here. We do budgets over 3 years, and in Iowa, property taxes are very, very difficult to project. In 2026, we look like we can hold the line as far as the fund balance and roughly a balanced budget in the general fund. We are looking at a slight drawdown, not a slight, but there is a drawdown projected for FY27 as well. As we progress through the state's property tax system, we're going to have to continue to monitor those items because oftentimes that's an indication of potential issues in the future as well. So please keep that in mind. But with the general fund for this year and the next year, we're projecting a balanced budget. 27 with the current budget that we have proposed is this drawdown on the city's financial resources that we've targeted early on that we're going to have to monitor on that as well.
So just before you move on, can you just remind us of what the required fund balance is based on, tell us what it's based on?
Yeah, the fund balance that we have here is, there's really 2 things on it. Is traditionally cities, when they came up with fund balances, they looked at it and said we get paid property taxes twice a year. And if you were to run out the twice a year on what you had as far as your payment, that means that you should have a fund balance of somewhere right around 25% as far as your cash reserves that you need to fill the gaps in between your property taxes. Since that time, it's become more refined for our bond rating. So instead of the bare minimum of 25%, which takes care of the largest source of revenue for the general fund, which is property taxes, what we have and what has been called by our bond rating agencies is they want to see that number somewhere between 35 and 45% if you could hold it on it as well. You get below the 35%, there could be questions from the bond rating agencies, and to be safe, we've always been right around that 40%. We feel okay with the 36%, and here's the reason why. We have, because we brought on new services, the Pella Community Ambulance, the department expenditures that we have this evening, Brian, somewhere between 1.6 to 1.7 million from an operational standpoint. If you look at that and multiply just 40% and add it on to your fund balance, it's tough to maintain when you increase the numerator on that as well, as far as the overall expenditures on what we have on it. So with the expenditures on the 35%, we feel good with our bond rating on that, but it's really based off two things, what you're hearing me say. A is the timing of property tax revenue, and B is your bond rating. And traditionally, we've tried to target somewhere between 35 to 45% that we have, and as you can see, for these 2 years, we're on the lower end of it. But again, taking over the ambulance will be communicated over to our bond rating agencies, is it's going to take us some time to assimilate them in and build up the necessary reserves to account for the ambulance.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I stole some of your time, sorry.
Okay.
I don't need it all anyway.
Okay. Before Chief gets started, I think from there, and like for most departments that we have this evening, it's a pretty much standard operating agreement budget that we have in here. We had a part-time janitorial position that we had included for 24, and I think this is the full budgetary allocation is the reason for the increase that we have for the compensation for the fire department. But overall, from an operational standpoint, what I would say is the Pella Fire Department is both they're an outstanding department for the city of Pella, but they've also saved the taxpayers thousands of dollars over the years as well. And again, when we look at total operating expenditures of $119,000, that's significant for the city of Pella. Significant that we've got people willing to volunteer their time, especially for the fire department, and that we've gotten by for $119,000. So we think that's very reasonable. Let's go on to the CIP, and I'd like to ask Chief to cover his CIP projects in the schedule, starting off with an emphasis on what's planned for 2025.
Okay, there's really no surprises here. This was all in before as proposed, but the firefighter bunker gear is mandated by NFPA 10-year replacement, and that comes up in 25, so that's why that figure is in there. That's on the replace, that's the third one down. That is a split cost with Lake Prairie Township, so half of that 165 is the city's share. The top one is new firefighter bunker gear. That's if we put a new guy on and we have to put new gear in him. We have avoided that with this big expenditure coming. We've tried to get by with our old gear as much as possible, so we haven't gotten into that one. That becomes a factor later on after we buy our gear if we change personnel, if we have a difficult size to fit or something like that. Otherwise, we try to use what we have even if we change personnel. So building maintenance, that's just a yearly one that we have in there. The building was built in the 1950s. It takes some money to keep it going. So that's not a very big figure, but we do what we can with it. Portable radios, that goes out to 26. So I don't know if you want me to speak on that or not, Mike, but...
I'll leave it up to you, Chief, but I think you're covering the highlights, so.
Okay. So the only one else in there on the 25-year, I think I might defer to you on that one. That's the extrication. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and it's an item that we've asked Chief to put in the budget for the extrication costs, and this deals with the Pella Community Ambulance. And just so you understand, this request came from city administration, and we're looking for a better way of doing things and also just some practical realities of the situation. We've talked about the Pella Community Ambulance Services, the Lake Prairie Fire District. The Lake Prairie Fire District is made up of Summit, Lake Prairie Township in Marion County, Black Oak, and Richland in Mahaska County, along with the city of Lighton. The reason we're asking and proposing to move the extrication equipment from the Pella Community Ambulance over to the fire departments is in Iowa. It's my understanding, at least in talking to both chiefs on here, both Chief Bogart and Chief Higginbotham, and I'd ask Chief to chime in if I misstate anything. Most of the time, extrication in cases is performed by the fire department. We're somewhat unusual. We perform extrication at the Pella Community Ambulance. And what we're doing from a planning standpoint, and keep in mind, is we're preparing hopefully for a referendum in Marion County on the essential services tax in March of 2025. The key issue is when we deal with the ambulance is in the future, and I want to state no one is proposing this, but if there ever needs to be a transition in the future, where if there's an essential services tax in Marion County and in Mahaska County there's not, and you run into an issue potentially serving Mahaska County with no funding, there might be a need to transfer the extrication services from the ambulance over to the fire department. Maybe in Mahaska in the future, that could potentially be, they could be potentially served ambulance-wise by Mahaska County Community Hospital on it. I believe that's where the Mahaska County is currently levying the tax for the hospital on it. So what we're trying to do from a planning standpoint is if the event ever occurs in Marion County where there's funding, in Mahaska County and there's not, and we have to draw a different boundary line for service of the ambulance, that we transfer the extrication equipment over to the fire department so they can still be served with extrication equipment regardless who the ambulance provider is. And I want to stress nobody is proposing any changes on it, but it's just the practical realities. What I would also tell you from a financial standpoint, the ambulance in the future, in my opinion, will go where the funding goes for it on as well, and that's just a practical reality of the situation. The other item that we have is right now into our ambulance is we have a trailer that we currently haul all of our extrication equipment on. If we're going to continue to do it on the ambulance, what's being proposed is to staff each ambulance with extrication equipment for it. And I may be a little bit off on my numbers, but each set of extrication equipment is about $16,000. So if we staffed each one of our ambulances with extrication equipment, it's $48,000 on it. The item is if we transfer it over to the fire department, the thought is, and if they perform the extrication service, it's $16,000, and it can be shared with the Lake Prairie Fire District as well. And so what we have in here is a proposal to move the extrication equipment from the ambulance over to the fire department for the reasons that we just stated.
So for the record, Greg and I have spoke about this, and we're on the same page. Fire is here to do what we're needed to do. We just don't have the equipment, so that's what that fund is in there for. So, any questions?
What call-out compensation for the guys?
$20.
$20?
You guys just raised it like a year ago, so that's why the general fund had that
quick.
increase. Yeah.
Bless their hearts.
Any more questions?
Well, make sure you convey to the group our appreciation. I know we just had an appreciation dinner this week,
We did.
which was a lot of fun to see those guys together. They truly are a team, so.
Definitely.
But we can't say it too much, how much we appreciate what the fire department guys do for the city. They do save us a lot of money on doing it on a volunteer basis. And pretty obvious that they love to do it, but make sure I think they know how much we appreciate them, but we can never tell
I
them
do.
too much.
I will pass that on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Well, Chief McShady's taking his seat up front. Okay, let's go over their operating on it. The big increase that we've had with the police department, both on the revenue and expenditure side, is the grant that we're discussing this evening, the crisis intervention grant for the cost of a new officer. It's caused an increase in both the inflation and the revenue side and the expenditure side. What I tend to focus on is the net general fund budget subsidy. As you can see, we have an overall increase of 1.17%, which I view as very reasonable when we talk about police department operations. And so, Mandy, if we could go to the police department CIP. I would ask Chief McShady also to focus on to give an overview of the CIP and discuss any operational issues for the Pella Police Department. But one item that I'd like to have Chief discuss is the proposed interoperability radio project that we have here for $350,000 as well. So Chief?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So what I'd like to do is kind of touch, excuse me, on more of the items that are like highlights. I know you guys have a tremendous amount of information in your packet, and I have 30 seconds less than I did. So I do want to talk about patrol vehicles only because I do get asked a lot of questions about this, and I think it's important for us to understand why we buy a patrol vehicle every year. So there's no more critical piece of tool or equipment than a vehicle. If we can't get to the call, then we have issues, right? It's also important to understand that we go through a state bid system, so we purchase these vehicles far lower than anybody else can. But also, we only have the availability of 1 to 2 to choose from, so we can't go to the lot and get one. Sometimes these vehicles take about a year to get. So there's windows that open and close where we can order. The big expense to vehicles, from my perspective, is the upfitting costs. So, for example, our in-car cameras that we put in the vehicles just went up to $7,000 a piece. And so all that critical equipment does add about $21,000 to $26,000 to the cost of the vehicle. But what my staff does is we take a look at our vehicle fleet every year, and we really have a 5-year patrol rotation. So a vehicle comes in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and it continually gets assessed. And after that 5th year, we consider different options on what to do with that vehicle. That keeps our fleet running nice and new and within the repair and maintenance schedule as well. So that's why each year you'll see a vehicle cost in there, and we add about a 3% each year for a cost adjustment. The other thing that I thought was just worthy of touching on was that mental health officer vehicle. It is in our CIP, but again, that's fully funded, the upfit cost and the whole deal. So we'll be adding that to our fleet as well for that team, that co-responder team. Last but certainly not least, and we've talked about this earlier, but it is our interoperability radio project. This is a critical piece that the police department, the ambulance, and the fire department will all benefit from as far as bringing this system finally up to date, up to speed for not only system redundancy but coverage. We just don't have the coverage that we need in some of these outlying areas, and we're going to continue to serve in those areas. So it's very critical that when any of our folks press that button, that they get to talk to somebody. And then also with redundancy as well, I won't go into specifics, but because of the system that we have, we don't have an efficient way to have system redundancy should our system fail. We have a backup plan, but we don't have the plan that is most efficient and effective. And so this would also help us reach out to our business partners, our industry partners, and direct communication. We run quite a few calls out to Vermeer and Pella, and so this all makes sense. And we're also seeing a little bit of funding coming in as well for this project. So that's nice to see. So with that, about 3 minutes and 36 seconds, I would love to answer any question that you have about the CIP or anything in general.
Is that, oh, go ahead.
No.
Is that the private source funding you just mentioned?
Yes.
For the radios?
Yes.
And
That's from the
a
911.
fundraiser or what?
Yep, that's from the 911 board.
Okay.
So we went to them a few weeks ago. Part of the piece of this equipment is something we would need to replace anyway, but it also had to be included in that radio project fund. So it's kind of a win-win. We had to replace it anyway, but the 911 board is funding that piece of equipment.
So when it comes to radio, in the past, we've had a lot of discussion about a countywide. This is just staying on our own and taking care of ourselves, or what?
Well, yes and no. So with this project, we finally get to join a network, which is crucial for interoperability and redundancy. So we are benefiting from our neighbors who have also created towers. Mahaska County comes to mind, who just funded 3 of their towers in Jasper and Powesheik and even Polk. And so joining that network increases our footprint of being able to reach out. We did look at what a county-wide radio system would cost when we were going through the consultant phase, and that was north of $8 million.
In the book here, I see this source transfer switch,
Yes,
which is now, 44 years old,
yes.
and, it's exceeded its useful life. Looks to me like it should be a little higher priority.
Well, so we currently are operating on a diesel generator over at the fire department. It's well maintained, but it is, in looking forward through improvement projects, we have identified that as a need. And the longer we wait, obviously the higher that cost comes. But that is a good point.
And the risk.
Sure.
Does this, for this basic guiding here, interoperability, is that, where does that land? Is that it, everything that you want, is that it, just
No.
scratch the surface? What is it?
That brings us about midway, so I was able to, we've been working on this project for years. I was able to bring in basically 3 different stages of where we could get in and stand up the project. So the 570 that we talked about a few weeks ago gives us what we need, and everything at once. Around the 350 mark brings us in about halfway, and we need to look at some funding opportunities and some budget opportunities in the next 1 or 2 years. So, good question.
So you're saying that the best radio system would be a 570?
Well, the best is a good way to put it, but perhaps the most complete for what we, for what we need to do. And the difference in that is really what is put in our dispatch center. So maintaining the consoles that we have, for example, versus purchasing a brand-new console that does more interoperability things. With this price, we can still stand up the system, but all of our add-ons are à la carte. So the 570 would make that a done deal. It wouldn't be à la carte anymore. It's real hard to explain, so
But
I'm sorry.
that gets us, basically gets us the start of where we want to be.
The 350, yes. We're able to get into a network, stand it up,
We can add things onto it. Gotcha.
yes,
So that's the minimum that we want.
yes.
Oh, that's probably the minimum.
Is that more than anything in this budget season, this is the one thing that is probably my number one. It's missing that we have documents and the ability to remedy that and just it's not in the real community.
Thank you for that.
Anything else, anyone? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, guys.
I believe we have the ambulance up, and we have a couple items with the Pella Community Ambulance, and these are some good news that we have. If you recall, when we first took over the ambulance, we said it would be approximately 3 years before we received any state financial assistance for the ambulance on it. And the Chief, I believe that the name of the grant is the Ground Medical Transport Grant.
The GMT,
Yeah, GMT,
Ground Emergency Medical Transport.
Ground, okay, I stand corrected. The good news is it's forecasted to be received next year in the amount of $130,000. So when we look at the revenue increase, that's the lion's share of the increase that we have from the current fiscal year budget. The second item that we have, and as we stated with the Lake Prairie Fire District, we're trying to assist the townships in providing ambulance services to them. They're currently paying $46,000 for this current year for ambulance services. We're proposing for next year, next fiscal year, to maintain that $46,000 level. Hopefully in Marion County, there'll be an emergency services tax referendum on it. And our thoughts are is if it passes in Marion County, that will shore up the funding or the funding deficit in the townships for Marion County. It doesn't address Mahaska County, but at least it addresses Marion County on that as well. So our thoughts are is if we can hold the line for the township services for next year, get through the essential services tax referendum, see where we're at. If it doesn't pass, we're going to have to talk to the townships about what they're paying next year, and it's going to most likely, very likely have to go up, but that's at the discretion of the Pella City Council on it as well. So those are the lion's shares of the increases. Overall, the expenditures, right around 5.61%. I will state this for the Pella Community Ambulance, and our department does an outstanding job serving the community. But keep in mind, with their current work schedules they have, and Chief, you know this off the top of your head, I think, but we have to be fully staffed on a weekly basis. We have about 130 hours of part-time needs.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of part-time assistance that's needed on there, and what's been one of the issues in staffing the ambulance is the lack of part-time help on it. EMTs, paramedics are in need throughout the state of Iowa, and it's getting harder and harder to find individuals for part-time basis. And so what happens is you got to cover that 130 hours to be staffed 2 ambulances on a 24/7 basis. You have to call in your full-time people to come in and cover those shifts. That cost overtime for the city of Pella. So from a financial standpoint, it's getting challenging to meet the service level needs of there simply because of the lack of part-time help. It's forcing us to go to more full-time employees. And I want to be transparent. We did receive a request, city administration, for 2 additional paramedics for the Pella Community Ambulance. Our thoughts are, is before we take action on the paramedics and the additional cost of that on it, is to go through the assessment on there, get a handle on, what are we shooting for? And I think it's very important that we have that number, at least an idea from the service levels on it, is when you look at the geographical area of the Pella Community Ambulance, and then also the number of service calls that they have, that should translate into what staff or how many staff that we should have. Once we know that, we can diagram a financial plan to get to those levels. But absent that, it makes financially planning for the ambulance very difficult. I also think it's going to be helpful, as we stated earlier, for other entities that use the ambulance services and really being able to articulate the cost of those services. We just talked about the Lake Prairie Fire District. The essential services tax doesn't pass in Marion County, and we still have both Marion County and Mahaska County. After this assessment, we will be able to have another source of what is the cost actually to serve the townships on it. Same thing with Pella Regional Hospital and the transfers as well. But overall, it's a very challenging environment. Runs are up. It's harder to get part-time employees for the ambulance, and it's a very, very challenging environment for the Pella Community Ambulance. So, Chief, I'll let you go ahead and cover your CIP that we have proposed, and then also any operational discussions that you'd like to have, feel free to.
Sure, thanks. Thank you, guys. First CIP budget thing I've got is our replacement, or it's a remount of our current ambulance, 915. It's a 2015, so it'll be 10 years old. Most ambulances get about 8 to 10 years, depending on how hard they run. We have 3, so it's distributed out. We put an average of about 76,000 miles a year on our ambulances. Now that's spread out across 3 of them. But it's going to have almost 190,000, I think it has on it currently. It's a remount, so it's not a brand new ambulance. You're taking the box off and put it on a new chassis. So that's saving us about $100,000 by doing that. You can only do that once. So the one we replaced last year was a remount. This will be a remount. The one that we've got scheduled for 2028 will also be a remount. So when we have to replace again in 10 years, so in 2034, that will probably be a brand new ambulance, and it'll be a lot more expensive than what we're currently doing. The 2026, I have a Sprinter ambulance, and that's for a 4th ambulance that's adding to our fleet. And that is a smaller ambulance. It gets better gas mileage. It's not ideal for 911 coverage, but it is excellent for transports. I think when I talked to you guys before, I talked about how our transports to Iowa City and Des Moines are really what's killing us as far as runs. It's not the amount of runs that they're asking, it's the amount of time away, and with us being busier at home. So with an addition of that, that'll give us 4 ambulances. I think that's what the study is going to show, is that we need 4 ambulances and not 3. And then the cardiac monitors, they were on a grant as well when we got those back in 2012. And we will try and get a grant for them as well. If not, obviously it's in the budget to get those replaced. That Sprinter ambulance, could be a possibility this year. We put in for a grant for it. We're hopeful we get that, and not only did we put in for the ambulance itself, we put in for the $70,000 worth of equipment on that as well. So we put in with the Gary Sinise Foundation, so we're hopeful that goes through. So that'll get us the amount of ambulances we actually need at this time. So between the ambulances, and then Mike kind of hit on it a little bit, when we came to you guys, when you guys took us over, we were not perfect. We were just trying to keep things running, and so we weren't staffed where we should be because we were just trying to keep the doors open. And so you guys took over a broken service. And I appreciate what you guys have done. You guys have helped us since we've been with you. But we were staffed at the time when you took us over for our 2020 calls, which was 1,733 calls. Our first year with you guys, we ran 2,183 calls, and we were staffed for 1,733. So we had a lot of people that were very dedicated, doing a lot of overtime. We're on pace for more than that now. So I think this study is going to show that we need more people. Our challenge is part-time staff. We just can't attract part-time staff. There is a shortage of EMS in the state of Iowa, and they're all going for that full-time position somewhere. And so they're not attracted to a part-time position. It used to be you'd work your full-time position and then, hey, I'll work part-time EMS somewhere else. Well, no, those people that are working in EMS full-time, they're going somewhere else and doing something else part-time because for mental health reasons, they don't want to stay doing healthcare on their second job. So that's where we're struggling with getting people. So I think we're probably that study is going to show we need 4 to 6 more full-time staff to serve everything we currently do. Because if you remember when I talked to you guys, I think it was about a month ago, I talked about we had to start cutting some of our services. So we no longer do CPR classes for the public. We no longer do non-emergent transfers out of the hospital from midnight to 6 because of the staffing shortages at that time. So in order to do everything that we want to do and be able to do, it's a staffing issue that we need. I think that study is probably one of our most important things we have in the budget this year. That's all I've kind of got. What questions do you guys have for me?
So do you have, under your current staffing model, now you've just said you need more, but are you fully staffed under your current staffing model?
We're fully staffed with full-time. I am way short on part-time.
Not long ago, we had quite a number of volunteers. Are they no longer qualified under current regulations?
So we don't have volunteer status with us currently. Everybody's paid for what they do. Even volunteers are paid for whatever they do. So there's a big fall off in volunteerism statewide everywhere, and a lot of that, and EMS hits it worse than the fire side, and a lot of it's because of the education and the continuing education you have to keep your service, to get your certification and then keep your certification. There's a lot of hours that need to be put into that. So just to become a paramedic, you've got over 2 years worth of school to get that, and then who wants to volunteer after they went 2 years worth of school? So they weren't paid for that. That's the hard part.
Anybody else? All right, thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
All right, as Mayor is taking her seat, let's go ahead and cover the operations of the library. Again, this is very consistent from what you're going to see from most city departments this evening. We have total proposed expenditures of right around 2.75%. So again, this is a standard budget, operating budget from it based on existing service levels and maintaining current staff with that. Let's go ahead to the CIP, Mandy. I'm going to turn the floor over to Mayor Strickler. Mayor, if you could talk about your CIP, and then, of course, if any operational issues or concerns that you may have, feel free to discuss those with council.
So, good evening. The main highlight of our CIP is the line item budgeted for next year, which is the HVAC condenser. The need for this improvement was identified in conversation with Public Works staff person Ryan Waddell, who does a tremendous amount of support for the municipal facilities, and we really rely on him at the library. The need for this repair is because the library was constructed about 25 odd years ago. Are going to become more and more expensive, harder to accomplish. And so that is the need for the timeliness of that repair. Because of the expense involved with that, the other CIP projects that we have identified are a little bit further down the calendar because while they are important, there is a little bit more discretion about how quickly they need to be accomplished. I will say that the technology updates up to this point have been annual, and I think it is important for that to be maintained. As a 21st century library, we have a lot of patrons who rely on the public library for technology support, whether that be printing, online access, assistance with their own personal devices, or supporting their what they may lack in personal devices. And so that's something that I would like to see maintained is the annual updates of technology. And if needed, then pushing back further, one of the other CIP projects. Again, I hate to push back a project, especially one that would benefit our patrons and the public, and that they've identified as a need. But I do think that technology updates are vital for the library on an annual basis. It's kind of a broad overview of the HVAC condenser and the technology updates specifically. I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have or any of the other projects that are a little bit further down the road, if that would be helpful.
Just curious, what you were doing in the Heritage Room?
Mm-hmm. So that was identified as that was a request that came from the public from a prior strategic planning initiative. And that was because there was a desire expressed for more of an adult quiet reading area, and that the Heritage Room would be a good place for that, but that there needed to be a bit of a redesign so that there would be a greater visibility by the library staff into that space, as well as being able to move the existing collections in the Heritage Room elsewhere into the library to expand on the reading space in the Heritage Room. So that was the idea, that would be the project that would be accomplished through that project.
And I think that's a very good room for all of the heritage collection.
It has served us very well for that purpose. The reason that was identified as a project was because of requests from the public from our strategic planning. I want to say that was done, it was prior to my tenure in Pella, so it must have been 2017, 2018. So it's been a number of years that need was expressed. And again, I hate to push a project that down the road that has been identified by our patrons. But because it does serve us well for the Heritage Room and that resource, it's a lower priority compared to the technology updates and simply the taking care of the HVAC system, obviously. Any other questions for me?
That might be a good project for donation.
Oh, the Heritage Room, potentially. Anything else for me tonight? Thank you.
Thank you.
No, aquatics is up first, so if Alex, you'd like to come up to the table? I believe Alex and Kevin are up first, and then Chandler and Brenda, so we'll cover both Alex and Kevin's division. Jeanette Vaughn is out of town this evening and couldn't be with us, and so I'll be giving the department's overview, but I would also ask our staff if there's anything that I omit that you view as important or would like to discuss with council, feel at liberty to do so as well. From an operational standpoint, it's very, very consistent with this proposed budget, is we've had expenditures went up 3.41%. Again, on a revenue basis, the increase in the revenues increased revenues at the Boss Lawn and Golf Course. And I'd like to say a couple things with the department. If you haven't been out to the Boss Lawn and Golf Course, I would encourage you to go out to it because it's a world of difference of where it's been the past 4 to 5 years. Staff is doing a great job on this, and we're seeing it both from a revenue standpoint and just basically from the compliments the city is receiving on the condition of the course and the service out of the clubhouse as well. So we're making strides out there, and I'm very appreciative of what the staff has done at the golf course. But if you look at that, we have a proposed deficit or operating subsidy that's been as low as I can remember in recent memory off that as well. So we're making all the right steps on that as well. With the revenues, we are proposing a fee increase. We're going to be holding a separate policy and planning session on that, and this would be for aquatic fees. We'll briefly go over those this evening, but those are the lion's share of what we have. Again, this was an analysis, and I had asked Community Services to take a look at programs and services that they felt that potentially we could increase fees for council's consideration. And what came back was proposed fees potentially for increasing aquatics fees on it as well. So again, we'll be discussing this in a separate policy and planning session. This will be a separate action by council outside of the budget as well. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. I believe the first item that we have on the docket is the Aquatic Center. And I'd like Alex to talk about your proposed CIP, but also we had a new item that popped up this year, not popped up, but there's been a continuing issue at the outdoor pool. And I'd like Alex and Chandler both to discuss this and inform council on the proposed improvements at the city's outdoor pool. So go right ahead, Alex.
So we have quite a few projects in the next budget year. So roof replacement, this is for our outside pump house building and then the locker room building as well. We've already had to make some repairs on this. These roofs were constructed in 2004, so it's been about 20 years since they've been done. The pump house also has some settling that we'll need to address as well. Pump and motor replacements is an ongoing project. We have quite a few pumps outside for features and for just moving the water in general. As everything, especially in the aquatics, has gone up immensely, so we've had to continue this project out. We do have some unworking features because of these pumps that have not been updated and replaced. Affordable refurbishment, 2026. Water heaters, these are the water heaters for the shower house at the outdoor pool. They definitely need to be repaired as they're at the end of their life, and they heat the water for the showers and the sinks in the outdoor locker rooms, which do get used by close to 20,000 patrons per summer. So that's quite a few people who use those. The repainting of the outdoor pools, we ended up having to add in next year due to the very dry conditions over the last 2 summers. We've had some increased cracking as well as fading that was not as bad within 2 summers ago. So that's one of the big reasons for that one. Same with the slide material. People just walking up and down those, the chlorine adding to that has made the material slippery and needs to be replaced. Was it last replaced in in 2019. So will need to be replaced as well.
You were wondering about the underpool for the leak.
Yeah, feel free to update council. I know that's an ongoing issue as far as the leak that we have, but that's a likely CIP in the future once we identify the corrective action. So Chandler, feel free to update council.
30 seconds, we have a big leak in the river. We've employed a scuba diver from Indianapolis, Florida, and we found one leak, but we did not find the big leak. So we are still searching to find it. The leak has really not showed itself and is hitting a drain line around the river somewhere, and we cannot isolate it. So at some point we might have to dig the entire wall around the outdoor pool to find the leak, which would be a huge cost. So we burned maybe 500,000 gallons in the month of July last year. So it's a big leak, and we have continued to try to find new methods, but it will be an issue coming up as soon as we can probably isolate it and find it.
Everything is usable.
Everything
You'll be opening as normal.
That's the plan. We're still working on finding it.
We actually injected helium gas into the pipes and found one pipe off of the stairs that we had to excavate concrete, and we had to suck the rock out of the backside of it. That was only a compression fitting. That wasn't the big part.
Do you still see a lot of out-of-town patrons?
Yes, we do. Even with the indoor, we've had lots of out-of-town patrons.
Well, before we go off of the aquatics, just a couple points, and for those that are new to council that may not be aware, but if you go out to our pool, I always tell people, if you watch our lifeguards, they operate differently than just about any other pool that you'll go to in the state of Iowa. We're under Ellis and Associates, and I think it's for the better on it as well. I'm very proud of our lifeguards. But one item that we've struggled with in the past is recruiting of part-time lifeguards. Alex, could you give council an update on where you stand with lifeguards?
Yeah, with that increase, last year we were fully staffed, and this year it looks like we will be fully staffed as well. So that's great. Coming in makes our job a lot easier, and fatigue and things don't settle as well. So.
And it's a big deal too when you look at the additional demands of the Ellis, and I may be a little bit off, but the whole premise of it is to identify a victim in distress in 10 seconds and be in the pool and performing rescue operations within 20, I believe. So if you go out to the pool in the summer, or even in an indoor pool, you'll watch a lifeguard. They're constantly scanning the water surface on it as well. So when we talk about a staffing issue at the pool, it's a big deal, and we're glad that we've made progress on the part-time staffing issues.
What are we paying now for lifeguards?
$15.01 is the starting. I will pop into, we do get externally audited by Ellis and Associates, so they have someone come in and film the lifeguards, and we don't know that they're there. And we have gotten the best score on the last 2 years of these. So that's the exceed, so that means the lifeguards are doing the best that they see. So we're very happy with them.
All right, I believe we have Mr. Voss up next to talk about athletics on what we have, and thanks, Alex. The big item that we have, and we're going to, before we turn it over to Kevin to review a CIP on it, I would state, from my perspective, if you've been out to the Pella Sports Park, it's some of the best fields that we have in the city, and that's lying share to what Kevin's done with our athletic turf, both at the golf course and the Pella Sports Park. There is CIP items that they did request that we had to delay on as a matter. It's just a part of financial realities as well, and it deals with the ball field leveling out here. And I'd like to have Kevin talk about that as well and the importance of it on that. And with that, but the big item that I'd like to have Kevin talk about this is the city soccer complex and what's being proposed. It's my understanding that club soccer has requested to operate at the Pella Sports Park this year as well. We're planning on accommodating that and allowing them to operate their program at the Pella Sports Park this year. And from a financial standpoint and also a planning standpoint, what we've proposed in the budget is making improvements to the soccer complex. I'm going to, before long, let Kevin go over that and show you and go over what exactly proposed at the existing complex. But we think before a decision's made in investing at the existing complex, council should consider if we want to invest in the current complex or if we want to develop other areas out of the Pella Sports Park and permanently move the club programs out there and have additional fields at the Pella Sports Park. The cost difference, if you look at here for the soccer complex improvements, this is about $1.3 million of investments that we believe would be out of the current complex. I didn't quite cover everything that's probably needed to really bring the complex up to speed, and I'll let Kevin talk to that. A new complex that we have in the budget, and at least in the budget letter for council's consideration, is about $2.8 million. So this would be building a new complex. The thing with the new complex, if we were to build the new complex, that would free up the roughly 30 acres that we have at the existing soccer complex for additional uses or other uses that may be more compatible. If you recall, we just recently upgraded 218th Avenue from a gravel road to a regular standard city street. We view that area could be potentially a nice area for another housing development. It's directly west of, well, actually it's adjacent to the Shady Brook subdivision out there as well. So there may be potential areas that those fields could be used for other uses that may meet the city's missions as well. But along with these improvements, we envision before we authorize the improvements is making a strategic plan or having a plan for the future soccer, either make investments in the current complex or invest in the Pella Sports Park and build additional fields at the sports park. Key item that may influence our decision one way or another, it's definitely a factor, to go up to the $2.8 million, that would likely require a referendum from the community as well if we were to issue a bond in that amount. So Kevin, if you could walk through the athletic CIP items.
You bet. On the soccer goals, that's an ongoing budget item to replace a pair of goals every year. So we're about halfway through that. Continuing, they have about a 10-year lifespan. That's between the previously used in town, and now we combine them and use both of them at the sports complex. So that one is, quite old. It has it's 23 years old, so it's been limping along. Ball field leveling. Yes, I did request a $28,000 budget, and so the ball field leveling is on the clay infields. This is a request to get the infield clay back to the original design to have the proper slope for the water to drain off the fields in a respectable time, so we're able to play ball games or whether it's a tournament in that day. It's critical for the tournaments to get through. So what this does is that funding will get us 2 fields done. I mean, there's a certain amount of material we got to bring in. We have to hire a contractor who has the proper equipment to be able to laser read these infield areas. So, and then on the soccer complex, just going to that, Mike went over that, and the year 2025 would involve in replacing the whole irrigation system, going through on the field leveling, it's not a total replacement of the soccer fields, but we will level out all the low spots and all the humps and all the bumps and everything in there. And that allows us for it to be able to grow it back in that amount of time. And then year 26, as you know, out the entrance drive in the parking lot is a gravel area. So that is for, to put it to concrete or pavement. So.
That would be asphalt or concrete?
That would be concrete. So those are for those 2 years.
So, good, Kevin, with the irrigation system, what we have planned with Club being out the Pella Sports Park, as far as the timeline, if council wanted to invest in the current complex, how long before Club could move back out to the existing complex?
It would probably be the fall of 2026.
Okay.
So currently, the club is going to be playing their 24 season at the sports park on the south area. We had to redo some fields and work together in order to be able for them to play out there this year. And so we can make it work as long as those fields do not have an underground irrigation system. They have a water reel up top. Those are 8 years old. So I'm banking those are going to go. If we want to put underground there at the sports park, that's about $190,000 for that if we wanted to upgrade that area. It's about a wash depending on the area that we want to go.
So Kevin, and this is probably a question for Brenda too, in moving Club out there, we're taking the area that's south of the parking lot. And if we wanted to put irrigation in there to make the fields and to accommodate longer term use of those fields, we need to upgrade the irrigation system for that area, correct? You said it's about 200,000.
About 200,000 approximately, correct.
And we most likely need to build additional parking at some point in time, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, Brenda, from a program standpoint, in the city's soccer participants, what we're proposing to do to accommodate Club is move some of our programs to the outfield of the Babe Ruth field, it's my understanding?
Yes, I have moved all of my football programs to the outfield so that we can put the soccer, the younger kids, up on the future fields 8 and 9.
And then in the fall, it's going to be a working together between the rec and the club as far as practices and games. Not everybody's going to have ideal practice times, ideal game times. There is some give and take. There's only so much space and so much daylight.
Kevin?
There would be no lights.
There will be no lights, and that is an issue with the club.
Kevin, I'd like to just ask your expertise. If we said that this level of activity that we're moving on that south area, if we wanted to continue to maintain that, my hunch is that we will need to make decisions sooner than later rather than prolonged decisions and just allow this. How long do you think we can continue the current use and still have those overhead reels before we run into similar conditions where we're proposing to move Club at is what we have at the existing soccer?
Basically, my sense is how long before none of the irrigation?
And then we're going to have a real deal with it. I don't know. I can say it's going to last another year or two. We are at the life of those water reels. And that, thinking about the water reels, that means we're watering from overhead during the day, which also means that also during the day we have to paint fields, we have to mow fields. I can't paint and water at the same time, it doesn't work. So that's why we water at night. It's more efficient, less wind, evaporation, and all that good stuff. So ideally, within 2 years, I'd like to have those fields have an underground, that type of system. I think you can make it, we can make it through this season. If we have a normal rainfall, we're going in dry. The wear and tear on those fields, they're in fair conditioning. They're not in the best condition. They're already, but it's going to show some wear and tear by the end of the season. Especially when fall comes. As long as we have water. But you see what happens at the soccer complex when we don't have water and we don't have rainfall. So we want to provide the best service that we can. possible that we can, you know, if we do minor repairs to the irrigation system at the soccer complex, field leveling a little bit there, put in an underground irrigation system at the sports park, and put in some additional paving. And depending on if the schedules can work, depends on where the size of each teams, the recs and the clubs, we can make it work at the sports park. Only in the short term. That's if you guys would decide to build phase 3, which I would say yes. Because I think, I mean, you know, the whole vision of the sports park and FOF at that time was to bring everything together. We can hold bigger tournaments more. It's going to benefit the club in the long run. It brings the community together. So that's a lot of money too. But it is an economic boost to our community.
On the other side of that is just pouring money down the rat hole to rehab the existing fields.
It's only going to last so long. So if your vision is to have the sports park built out, then maybe that's where the money needs to go.
Yeah, that's 30 acres prime development.
And then you have that. Yeah.
What I'm wondering is this timeline, so, if we gave the green light for the maintenance of the existing complex right now, you said it's gonna be, what, fall 26? So we're 2 years out before that would actually be, we decided right now, we're 2 years from that working. Right. And I can't pull a number out of a hat, but if we said, let's, instead of doing that, for me, it's more about the timeline. The money's a big deal, but if it was $500,000 and we could have it operational in 2 months, then it would be a different decision for me than it's gonna be a 2-year decision. So in that case, then why wouldn't we look even more at moving things out to the rec center, just to the complex? Either one is gonna be a pretty big timeline before they're actually useful. So that's something that I'm just looking at considering.
Move on to golf now. Kevin's department as well. Kevin, I'd like to have you focus on your CIP, and we did have to reduce some of the requests on the golf course bunker repair as well up here. 2 items I'd like to have Kevin, once again, feel free to talk about any operational issues at the golf course, Kevin, but also 2 items I'd like to bring to council's attention. There's a 3rd item too that we have, I believe, under the facilities, is the irrigation system. When this request came back to myself for consideration, complete replacement of the golf course irrigation system is roughly $3.4 million, Kevin, was the request. The key issue with the irrigation system, according to bond council, if we were to issue a bond issue for just the irrigation system, it's a referendum in the community. So what we have listed under there for council's consideration is just to repair the existing system. It doesn't necessarily get the complete irrigation system, and I want to make sure council's aware of that. And that is a decision we will have to make at some point in time, whether this is a $900,000 expenditure or a $3.4 million expenditure. As far as the course is concerned, Kevin, there's a whole 18 that we've had for the renovation project for some time out there as well. The course does need potential major rehabilitation in certain areas. I'll let Kevin talk to that. And so Kevin, if you can go ahead and cover your CIP and anything that you have of operations of the golf course as well.
Let's just hit on the irrigation system. I mean, you gotta have the irrigation system, or you're not gonna have a golf course. I mean, a quality golf course, like we have. We have made major strides, but it is 30 years old, and the lifespan of an irrigation system is 25 years. Same thing with the soccer complex, that's why we're at that point. So what the $900,000 does is it basically, depending on where the bids come in at, but basically it gets us replacement of the irrigation heads, the pump station, the computer control system, and that's about it. If the bids come in good, maybe we can get some of the isolation valves replaced. It does not replace the piping that we've had breakages on or the fittings. It doesn't increase the water efficiencies. So we are watering areas that we shouldn't be watering according to the current layout. And we can't adjust that without readjusting all the piping. So that's what that gives us. Now, which is significant. I mean, at least it can hold us there for a while. So the renovation of hole 18, that's, the final hole, the final playing hole out there. Not only the cart path is falling apart, that hole 18 is a watershed area, which the water that comes from the north acres of the driving range, the hotel area, the airport, part of that back corner comes through down hole 10 from the driving range through hole 18, out 14 and such. So we've had, that pond is silted in, it overflows on a major rain. And the drainage pipe that's supposed to have that is falling apart. It's the original corrugated metal pipe when it was built. And so all that would be looked at, or that's what we would want to have that replaced. The pond dredging, replacement of that pipe. Obviously, you're going to have to fix some irrigation. We would have to work together on that. The projects go hand in hand. So it's a major amount of work. It's going to take, whether we can time it late fall and get a great winter and have a, as far as hole closing, we're going to minimize it as much as we can. We don't want to shut anything down. That's the same thing with the irrigation system. We're not shutting the course down. We'll work around it. Will there be inconveniences and delays, or maybe a hole closed for a certain day or something, or yes. Unless we have a winter like we have this year. We're only got 3 weeks of snow and 2 weeks. So those are those two main things. The grounds and the bunker replacement, $10,000. That basically, whether it's green drainage or working on the bunker replacements. Originally on the bunkers we had 34 originally the system, and now we have renovated 4 of them. We're in the process, so we got 26 remaining. We're going to remove at least 9 more. We were in various capacities. We are also shrinking the size of these bunkers to make them more manageable, so we can have less maintenance there. But the bunkers do not drain. Mayor plays out there, Mark plays out there. He knows that these things on rain, especially when we have more and more events out there, such as the high schools, and this year we're going to have the Iowa PGA Pro-Am out there. I hope it doesn't rain right in there, so we can have some reasonable playing conditions in the bunkers. But $10,000, it gives us one bunker, and that's with staff trying to do some of the work. Alex is very good at trying to come up and being resourceful. He does a great job, but you can add 0 onto that. I would ask.
What were the number of rounds this last year?
Little over 14,000, 14,382 as far as in 23. That is over the previous year of 10,304. So it's significant. 40%. Yeah, 40% increase. We increased our revenue significantly. Mike brought that up. We have a great staff in the clubhouse, Matt and John. They know their stuff. They're one of the top, I consider the top 5 in the state as far as golfing ability and knowledge and expertise.
Is the event center done now?
Everything but the final stuff coming to you guys as far as, but as far as the work complete, correct, yes.
The work is all done?
Yes. They just had do some items on the punch list last week, and those are completed, so now they're getting final paperwork completed to come to you guys.
Just for curiosity's sake, how many heads, irrigation heads are there?
I have written down here some, 813.
Did a bunch of those get replaced, 5, 6 years ago, or did they only talk about replacing?
So, in 2014, there was a greens head replaced. I think that was 92 heads, if I remember right, Mike.
Incorrect.
We've actually had 2 of them fail already. You're supposed to get 20 years out of an irrigation head, but, I mean,
Salesman said.
so we will end up replacing all the heads at that time, if that was approved. Because by that time, we're already over 2/3 of this life already gone. And we're wanting to make sure, depending on how the bids come out, you want to have all the same type of irrigation heads.
I love driving through the parking lot and seeing that there's people from all over the place playing golf out there.
Yeah, you look at the license plates.
Yeah. It's just like the water park.
Yeah, the impact there that we have in our local economy for people coming in here. I don't know the exact dollar, I wish I had that.
Okay, anything else? Otherwise, we'll keep moving on.
All right. I believe this next segment that we have is Mr. Chandler, and the 2 projects that we have, once again, Chandler, operational items. Feel free to talk about anything impacting the city's parks on there as well, but some of the bigger projects that we have planned for the city's park system, the Southside Beautification Project, that's really a joint project with the city's electric utility. Tomorrow night, when we cover the electric utility, what we're proposing to do is those transmission lines. When we talk about this park, we're talking about the old power plant site that abuts Pella Corporation, so the green space area that's on Oskaloosa Street. It's roughly a 3-acre parcel. There's transmission lines that currently, overhead transmission lines that go across that property. Next year, what we're proposing to do is marry those lines with the electric utility, and so that would be an electric utility project. Once that's completed, we're proposing to hand off the project to community services, and at that point in time, we would install the beautification project that I believe is subsequently been named Charles S. Farver Park as well. Now, overall for the park, we have $350,000 in the electric utility budget. The community services budget has roughly $1,150,000. Of those total expenditures, we have roughly $300,000 of private donations for the park as well. So what the plan is to bury the lines in 2025. 2026 would actually be the installation of the parks. And the reason why I'm discussing this is the manpower of the city's park department. Once that park goes online, we're going to have to increase the staff on it, on that. That's a pretty significant ask and pretty significant area for what's being proposed as well. So we want to make sure council is aware that we will have to increase staffing when that goes online, but that is in the future as well. So with that, Chandler, I'd like to have you go ahead and feel free to comment on any CIP items in your budget, as well as any operational items that you'd like to discuss with council.
Yes, there will be tulips for tulip time. Let's just start with that.
You can guarantee that?
Yes.
I walked through Central Park today and I saw a few out.
There will be color for tulip time. Might be green leaves, but there will be color. So Mike already said it when I was starring. If we do the South Side project, we're gonna need some more help. And as we've heard from everybody else, seasonal staff, part-time staff is very hard to find. So that's a big project. So we're gonna need some help. Clockensville renovation, that's been on there. Fountain Hills, that was a new one we did. They built houses on both sides of that park out there pretty quick. So we're gonna need a sidewalk to connect those 2 properties together. Big one that's been out there for a little bit is the Central Park improvements. Those crab apples in there need to be kind of sourced out. So we need to go out and find some this fall. The fountain was built in 1921, 22. It's been moved a few times. I could probably go up there right now and push it over. I got some pennies up there making sure that the stream comes out the top nice and straight. So it's due. The sundial actually just had a blow up on it a couple weeks ago and just got repaired. So there's some things up there in Central Park and in our parks that need fixed, along with the Central Park windmill. The squirrel got a hold of him and really didn't like him up on the roof. So one thing that's currently on this year's, which this is not even on this slide, is the renovation for the Tulip Tower. Mike knows about this, but you guys don't. We had $165,000 slated in there for renovation and got estimates coming back from the engineer for $355,000. So either we push that off or we figure out a way to do it this year.
And what would that entail?
That's painting, that's structural issues, that's banding repair up top. One of them blew off a couple winters ago and landed in front of Yarsmas. There's some structural issues in the basement. We need to probably, and I would like to add concrete around the outside of it to keep water shedding away from the basement. And sealing all of the joints, taking out all the caulking and redoing that. So I get a lot of questions around the community, wondering if, when, why we haven't done it. We need to do it and renovate it. So $355,000.
How would you rank this project?
How would I rank the project?
1, critical, 2.
I mean, it's in the mecca of tulip time, so I'll give it a 1. Yeah, it needs to be done. So if it doesn't happen this year, Mike, then we put it in the following year for the correct amount.
Well, we just got the estimate last week, on it late last week. So looking at it, they're highly likely this will be in front of council very soon to proceed with that repair on it. That's at least my opinion of the matter.
Probably something else for you guys to consider is that Kiwanis Court repairs. That is the old Kiwanis courts there that serve both tennis courts and pickleball courts. The number for $25,000 is to remove those. What are we going to do past that? Are we going to add those back? Are we going to make a new complex? Are we going to add on the Codwell? Something to consider.
Have you seen the rubberized material that's proposed to put down on them? I haven't. What do you think?
I met with the guy last week. It's possible half the courts for 80 grand. If you do it all, it's going to be probably $160,000 over cracked asphalt. Is that a great option? I don't know. Would I like to see just to start over and redo it? For $500,000 is the estimate. You're almost not really halfway there, but this is really more for backyard recreational, not for full-time play. Would it work for a while? Yeah.
Worth putting down on a couple courts and seeing?
It is, but you still have the cracks on the tennis side. So you can't really have one side good and the other side bad. So something to consider. And the courts at Caldwell are getting repaired this spring. That is slated for this spring.
Is that, under that quote include installation or?
That's installed.
It looked to me like it was not hard to install.
pretty hard to install that much square footage. There's a lot of snapping and making sure it's right, and also they would also have to make sure that all the seams are correct so that it doesn't wobble on the cracks. Yeah, something to consider.
Is that asphalt there now?
Yeah, asphalt over concrete.
Oh, asphalt.
I sure hate to see those torn off. There are, some of them that I think are still playable with the crack right along the net. I walk by those, to look at. Sure hate to see them go. I just had so many people clamoring, that want pickleball courts.
Mm-hmm. And pickleball's huge in this town, and I get it. So I want the best surface for them too. But
And I
also,
don't think it's going to go away. Our high
No, it's
schools, are just, they're playing it. They're in PE. And I think it's growing, not just some of the older people that have talked to me, but the youth are playing it too.
Some local players have played on that surface. I think it would be worth installing a couple of courts and giving it a try. I'm sure you could get probably some funding match as well as local labor. They're pretty passionate.
Yeah, I've heard might become a collegiate sport.
yeah.
Another something to watch. March Madness.
There's pro pickleball on TV,
Oh, is there?
yeah.
Yeah, and you guys have it in your packet. There's other unfunded projects out there. There's the dog park. You guys see that in your packets. And the Wonderspiel phase.
Question
Two.
about the dog park. Would the city staff have to?
The city staff
clean
would
up?
maintain federal property.
Yeah, well, we actually have a slide we'll be covering here. I had it actually in Brenda's, but Chandler will be chiming in too on facilities. We'll talk about the proposed dog park along with Kiwanis Park Phase 2 as well, so. Alrighty, well, if there's no other questions for Chandler, we can go ahead and move on to the last item for community services that we have here. And we've got a special segment on the facility plan, so please hold off on any questions on the rec center as well as the community center. It's right after this department presentation. We have a whole segment on that in store. But let's talk about the community services general projects that we have. And we have Brenda here this evening. The big item that we have under the budget is the memorial building and the renovation to the memorial building. And Brenda and staff, if you can help me out with what's being proposed with this $300,000, I believe is the replacement of the roof, tuck pointing to the exterior. There's also some window replacements as well. The chimney in back of the building needs repaired as well from a structural standpoint. And then we also have some structural issues on the floor joists as well that we're looking to have. What we've been notified by the insurance carrier is that we were able to secure property insurance on the memorial building with the understanding that these repairs would be taking place within the next 12 months on the facility as well. So for $300,000, that's the estimate that we had on the building. And again, this is reality for older buildings across the state of Iowa. It's getting tough to secure property insurance, and those that you have to be able to demonstrate that you have a schedule for making repairs on it, but it's $300,000. The reason why I'm going over this is when you look at the community center, the renovation that we're planning for the community center, tomorrow night we're going to be talking about renovation of the old daycare buildings, 215 Main Street. That's in the city's budget as well. When we originally acquired the memorial building, what we were hoping to do was actually expand eventually city offices into the memorial building. At the time we acquired the memorial building, we had just were in the plans of starting the telecommunications utility, and we planned to house the telecommunications, at least the administration aspect of it, out of City Hall. We quickly ran out of space at City Hall, and we're hoping to grow into the memorial building that's right next door. Subsequently to that time, what we made a decision is to renovate the current community center, at least have the engineering done on the facility. There's office space available at the community center. And then we also have 215 Main Street, and Jerry, I don't think is here tonight, but the staff, I believe that building's 10,000 square feet. There is plenty of space at the community, 215 Main Street. And so what we think and what we're proposing is the memorial building is used by both the VFW and the American Legion. And we think the building is a great facility, but what we'd like to make sure we're all on the same page is the city investment in the public uses that occur at the memorial building. We want to make sure we at least have the discussion before we proceed with the renovations to those buildings, particularly in light that we're proposing renovation of 215 Main Street, which is about $1.4 million. The community center that we're going to be talking about here very soon, $6.3 million on it as well. The thought, at least to have the discussion, is could the American Legion and the VFW conduct their activities at one of those locations as well on it before we spend the $300,000? We at least want to have the discussion on it, but from my standpoint, this is probably a more urgent matter or priority matter in making the decision on the memorial building, because what we've stated is that we're planning on proceeding with the repairs from an insurance standpoint again. So again, that's a decision that's probably that we need to at least have that discussion during policy and planning, most likely this spring yet as well. As far as the other items that we have in the budget before we turn it over to Brenda, outside of there, we have the Wonderspielen expansion plan for next year at $150,000. In the fall of 2023, council reviewed a presentation by the Kiwanis Group on this, and this is for phase 2 of the project. It's roughly half of the construction cost of phase 2 of the project. The total project's over $300,000 roughly, and so we have that in the budget, the city share for 2025. And the Caldwell mini pitch, I'm going to let Brenda talk about that and the staff, but that's a project that's being 100% with donations on it as well, so there's no city funding involved in this. Now, to get to the last item on there with the Pellet Dog Park, we do have a proposed partnership with the Pellet Dog Park Association. What's being proposed is a new dog park that would be actually located down at Lake Red Rock. On there, it's roughly a 4-acre site at Lake Red Rock. The total project's about roughly $140,000. Actually, it's $180,000. They're asking for $86,000 of upfront funds. The reason why we did not put it in the budget has nothing to do with the project, is unlike Kiwanis Park, the current council, or most of the current council, has reviewed Kiwanis Park and the group presented to council. What we have not had at this point is the Pellet Dog Park Association to review the site, the proposed partnership, the funding, and the details on it as well. So we've chosen not to include it in the budget. Does not mean it's not a good project or the council should approve it on it. We just simply haven't had that presentation on it. So if council would like to put that project in the budget for $86,000, what we would recommend is listed under the local option sales and services tax fund for $86,000, but technically it's not in the budget. But what we were planning on doing is inviting the dog park in to make a presentation to council on the proposed partnership. So Brenda, in going through, if you could fill in the gaps for anything that I failed to discuss.
You've really hit it all. I mean, the mini pitch is gonna be fully funded by them. Chairman, I think you're working with the electric on some lighting for it, correct? So, yeah, that's a good project to do, because it's not costing us anything. Yep. But other than that, yeah, Mike hit on everything perfect, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Last item that we have for this evening, Mayor, is a discussion on the long-term facility plan. We're prepared to keep going if you'd like to go, or if you want to take a 5-minute break.
Does anybody need a break? Huh? Okay, we'll take a couple minutes here.
Yeah, this is the last item, so.
Sure spend a lot of your money. That park is wonderful. What's your consulting fee? By the way, how are you doing?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm available on Thursday mornings. Good. We give you a good plug. Have we got many volunteers for library board?
I haven't seen any yet.
We're chopping right through it.
All right, we need to get back at it.
Now you see the material. Dave here and
It's halftime, 26-24.
Who's that?
Iowa's ahead by 2 at halftime.
Halftime? They got their work cut out for them. Well, Iowa State game is far and
All right, I think we should get back after it here. Looks like everybody's settled back in. All right, Mike?
All right. Thank you, Mayor. But the last item that we have on for the agenda this evening is discussion on the city's long-term facilities plan, made up of 3 items: the community center, the proposed indoor recreation center, as well as phase 1 of the University Street Extension project. First item that we have up on the ballot tonight is the community center. And what we have is a picture of the complete plan. The full plan is $8.3 million. It's what's commonly referred to as the base plan, or what the city has proposed in our budget. We've identified as the base plan, and that the base plan really involves the upgrading of the electrical system, the plumbing system, mechanical system for the facility. The elevator addition is the addition that the Friends of the Community Center are proposing to add on to the building here. Now, the difference between the plans, the full plan is roughly $8.3 million. The base plan, as far as just the upgrade of the existing building, but does not include the elevator addition, $6.3 million. The item that we'd like to make sure council considers as we talk about the community center and plans for the community center is that it's very likely that the base plan, at least certain elements in the items, would be the electrical system, the plumbing system, and the roof will likely need to be done within the next 24 months on the facility for us to continue to maintain insurance, property insurance on the building. When we talk about property insurance, we have liability insurance on it. But once again, these older buildings that are over 50 years of age, it's becoming more difficult to be able to secure property insurance on the buildings. Now, I will say this, before we get started with the plan as it relates to the community center and the indoor recreation center, it's very important to note as we talk about both of these projects, I commonly refer to them, they're kind of joined at the hip. And they're joined at the hip because they both are proposing the exact same funding sources for the renovations. And we're going to go through them here very shortly, but both of them are relying on city cash contributions. They're both relying on the local option sales and services tax bond as well. So anytime you have projects that are sharing the same funding sources, that on this, you always have to consider them in conjunction, and that's why when we talk about the community center as well as the indoor recreation center, they're commonly referred to both as the long-term facilities plan as well. And in addition, both of the items were approved by the citizens of Pella on the recent local option sales and services tax referendum as well. So again, the key takeaway, the full plan's $8.3 million, the base plan is $6.3 million. What we have in the 2025 budget is to start the project, the renovation project, just shy of $1,278,000 on that. Now, I will state this as we talk about this project and the recreation center. Both of the timing of the project depends when they're authorized by the city council on it as well. But when we authorize and talk about future action steps with the community center, the very first thing we're going to have to talk about is whether we proceed with the base plan or whether that comes to the full plan here. The full plan, it may take the Friends of the Community Center a while to raise money for the full plan on it. And we're going to have to factor that in as it relates to the insurance-related issues on the existing facility as well. So those are all part of the deliberations that we'll be undertaking as we talk about future plans for the community center. Mandy, let's go ahead, please. Now, as far as the indoor recreation center, we spent a lot of time talking about this project, and just a brief overview of the project. The entire project, which consists of 4 gymnasiums, 2 pools, an indoor competition, a competition swimming pool, as well as an indoor recreation pool, workout facilities, walking track, roughly a 78,000 square foot facility. That full plan is $40.2 million. The base plan, which is the projects that are not in this, I'd say, black kind of highlighted area here, is $32.4 million. The 2025 budget includes funding to begin the construction of the indoor recreation center. It's right at $2,578,000. So it'd be done, the budget is what's being proposed is both projects would be undertaken at once or simultaneously on it as well. Now, a key item for consideration, and this is a big deal, we've had a group that's worked on fundraising for this project for well over a year, if not a year and a half of the project, and there's a significant amount of donations that have been raised for this project. From my perspective, the $15.6 million is outstanding, and we're very fortunate to have this level of commitment within our community on it as well. And typically, from city business and being in the industry for a while, I can't recall I've seen a project that's had this level of funding on it as far as the private fundraising. So that's a key item. When we talk about proceeding with the indoor recreation center, whether it's the base plan, the alternates that we have here, we also got to keep in mind the $15.6 million in private funding and pledges, which have already been secured for the project as well. Okay. Mandy, let's go ahead and briefly overview. Now, what's also included in the budget is phase 1 of the University Street and Baseline Drive extension project. And just in thinking about it, if you recall during the community services discussion this evening, we're talking about moving club soccer out to the Pella Sports Park. And when you look at scheduling games out there and activities out there, the issue of having a secondary access is becoming more pressing out there as well. And so what we have is the University Street extension for next year as well. The total budget for this in construction is $4.3 million. Now, ideally, from a phasing standpoint, and I would say this would be purely just ideal, it'd be nice to have at least the phase 1 project for University Street, which is let me back up. Phase 1 is University Street extended from 250th Avenue through the Pella Sports Park. This red highlighted area, this is the Baseline Drive extension here. From a timing and sequencing standpoint, it'd be ideal to have University Street extended first through the sports park before the rec center began construction on it for the dirt work over here. And what that would do is eliminate any type of temporary access road that would be needed for the rec center as well. And it would also save the city about $500,000 if we were able to time that right. So there's some logistics that are at play here. But when we look at the phase 1 project, so this includes the Baseline Drive project, University Street extension, as well as the sanitary sewer system that is needed for the indoor rec center. Phase 1 is $5.5 million, and what we're proposing is a general obligation bond that'd be issued to support phase 1. University Street extended all the way through to 240th Avenue. The complete project, $7.5 million. So the full project, $7.5. Phase 1's $5.5. I would also like to say the phase 1 also includes an extension of the city's water distribution system to the Pella Sports Park. And so what that would be is a new 12-inch main, I believe, Denny, if correct?
12-inch.
Yes, that would be on the south side of University Street that would extend to the site and would connect down to Baseline Drive. The reason why I'm mentioning this is we'll receive some benefit outside of the Pella Sports Park for this. We believe that this will increase fire flows on the southeast side of our community. So this is something as we look at the Lely industrial development, and we talked about that. Fire flows are pretty important for industrial developments. That will certainly help on the project. Now, as far as other items of consideration, that's one item to keep in mind is the water main extension has benefits outside of the indoor recreation center. The other item for consideration on University Street is University Street itself predates the indoor recreation center, and I believe it's been shown in the city's comprehensive plan since 2007. Every comprehensive plan that I've been a part of with the city of Pella, this has always been identified as a high growth potential area, and it's always had the University Drive extension shown as well. So the project itself extends past the indoor recreation center, but with the indoor recreation center, that would be the primary interest would be University Street on that as well. So I know council's been through this many times on all three projects, but let's go ahead and get to the updated cost estimates that we have for council this evening. Now, as far as the funding sources for the project, where we stand at is we're just shy of $42.1 million. What we have here is the local option bond of $16.1 million that we've discussed, and that's been fairly consistent with the plan since inception of April 2022. Private pledges total $15.5 million. The city's cash contribution, and we're going to be discussing this cash contribution when we discuss the electric utility tomorrow night, is the surplus funds are coming from the electric utility at $5 million. And then we have the GO bond that would be issued for University Street and Baseline Drive at just about $5.5 million. You add all those up, we're at $42.1 million. Now the expenditures that I have down here, and this is going to be, we'll state this, it's council's decision of the size and scale of each one of these projects, so keep that in mind. What I'm simply proposing up here is the base plan for all these projects. So in other words, with the indoor rec center, I don't have the full plan of $40.4 million up there. I have the base plan, which is the 2 gymnasiums. It's the competition swimming pool, and instead of an indoor pool or indoor rec pool, we have a turf area, and that's the $32.4 million plan that we have here. Same with the community center. I don't have the elevator extension project, elevator addition project in there at $8.3 million. I have the base project at $6.3 million in there for the community center. If we looked at the base project, and I also have phase 1 of the infrastructure. If we looked at phase 1, the base projects, the rec center and the community center, we have total expenditures of just over $44 million. This means we're shy just about $2 million in unfunded expenditures. And I'm going to circle back as far as city administration's recommendations on proceeding forward on the plan here very shortly. But keep that in mind is right now we have a deficit of about $2 million off the base plan. And before I go on in the presentation, is there any questions as far as the estimated cost for these projects or base plan versus full plan? Mr. Butler.
The 4.4 some odd million dollars for the University Road, and that doesn't include the sewer and water running out there?
Yes, it does.
It does include
Yeah.
that? Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit off. The total project on phase 1 is $5.4 million, but we've incurred some engineering this year, and then there's also some expenditures that extend past 24-25. But it includes the water and the sewer as well, in addition to the road infrastructure. Okay. Now I'm going to briefly go over these next 2 items. Mandy, if we could back up just for a little bit, actually. It doesn't matter which one we take on first. But we've had assessments that have been done on the indoor recreation center from an operational standpoint. City administration, this was 2 years ago, we performed an evaluation and gave an projected operating subsidy, and both of them use the same, I'd say, basis. What we are projecting when you hear the term additional subsidy, what we're assuming is once the indoor recreation center is open, we're going to close the city's indoor pool. Roughly in the budget, at least was for last year, it seems to me, we had a subsidy of about $380,000 that we currently spend on the indoor pool. When we originally did our analysis full-blown on the indoor recreation center and how we came up with our numbers, is we had an operating deficit of roughly about $500,000. At the time, we were spending roughly about $340,000 of subsidy at the indoor pool on it. We took that subsidy, we applied it to the rec center, and we came up with a projection that we need an additional $160,000 to operate the indoor recreation center, right around there. That was, in essence, our methodology. Subsequent to that time, we hired a firm named Ballard & King. They're a national firm that specializes in recreation centers. They performed an operational assessment of this, and actually on here, their projected additional operating subsidy for the rec center ranges between $100,000 up to $200,000 over the initial 5 years of construction. And so when you look at the additional subsidy, same set of assumptions. Once the indoor recreation center is open, the indoor pool would be closed at that point in time. They came up with between $100,000 to $200,000 on the operational assessment. What we've done as far as the operating and property tax impact is we've taken the Ballard and King $100,000 to $200,000. And we've also taken the fact and we've assumed, and I'm going to say all this stuff is based on assumptions, but with this, what we've seen is if you use the existing valuations that we have for University Street on it, and you factor in what we think we're going to have for growth next year, if we were to issue a general obligation bond, we would believe at this point in time, without considering anything else, just on face value, there may be options to reduce that, but we believe that it would increase the city's debt service levy by 53 cents. We also believe when the recreation center opens up, and this would be 2 years down the line once you start construction on it, that the annual subsidy would be $100,000 to $200,000. We believe that that would increase the city's operating levy rate between 17 cents and 31 cents, somewhere right around there, depending if it's 100,000 or if it's 200,000. If you look at both those, what we feel is for a $200,000 home, and again, there's a lot of assumptions in these numbers, but this is just first blush if you're using existing valuations out there. The existing increase in the city's property taxes could be $70 to $83, but if there's development that goes around that site and spurs development, that can be significantly reduced. But those things are very hard to forecast, and that's really something that a question for the city's financial advisor, which would be Mr. Michael Maloney, to do, and that's something that we envision at a future work session. We're going to be zeroing in on this, but this is just staff's basic analysis that we had here, and it's based off what we know as far as development and what we believe is could be likely out there for the rec center. Mandy, let's go ahead, please. Now, as council is aware, we've also had operational, in addition to the operating assessment for the indoor recreation center, we've also had analysis on the economic analysis of both the construction of University Street as well as the indoor recreation center. And with this, we had Impact 7G did the analysis on just the economic impact of constructing University Street through. And what they came up with was that $5.5 million, and what they were looking at was actually about a $6.5 million project at the time, involved the full build of University Street. I want to be upfront with that. But for the state of Iowa, just during construction of both University Street and the Recreation Center, they forecasted that it would translate to an additional 700 temporary jobs for the construction, roughly just shy of an additional $100 million in economic impact. Closer to home, what that would translate to during the construction of both University Street and the rec center is just shy of 400 temporary jobs and an economic impact of $65 million. When Ballard King analyzed the annual impact of conducting tournaments at the Indoor Recreation Center, and so again, this would be on the full build, so this is 4 gymnasiums and the competition swimming pool. They planned for roughly 30 events on a typical year that would be held, so this would be 30 tournaments. The number of basketball tournaments, if I had to have the breakdown between basketball and volleyball, it seems to me is roughly, Alex, help me out, 22 basketball, volleyball, and about 8 swim events. If you look at the economic, thank you, the economic impact on an annual basis of conducting tournaments at the Indoor Recreation Center was just shy of $5 million. So a good way of looking at this is sometimes the city does projects that from a direct financial impact don't necessarily show up as this, and they're hard to trace as far as the impact. We know they're out there. They're commonly referred to as loss leaders, and they're typically associated with any type of amenity we construct at the city. But there is significant economic value for the community in constructing these projects that we have. Now, before I go on to city administration recommendations on what we see is things that we should consider as we consider construction contracts for both of these projects, is there any questions for myself or staff on what's been done, estimates to date? I'm lucky. I think everyone's wore down after tonight. So, but the good news is that you'll have tomorrow night, and we'll be talking about it potentially tomorrow night. So if you get home and say, "Boy, I wish I would have asked him X, Y, and Z," you'll get your chance tomorrow night. Okay, Mandy, don't go to the next slide. You can. I could just go off memory with the recommendations. They're okay. Let's go back to the numbers on here and look at like this. Our recommendation when we consider construction contracts, if you recall, we said that the indoor recreation center and the community center and our eyes are joined at the hip. That's because they share as the same funding source, the local option sales and services tax bond, and they also share city cash investments. So whenever you consider two projects on there, we think it's a good idea that if you're going to construct 3 projects on this, and we would say this for any construction contract, when it comes time to sign a construction contract, this number up here, total funding sources, should equal total expenditures down here. That is our first recommendation. So if we consider the indoor recreation center first, one of the questions that you should be asking city staff is, what assurances do we have that we have enough money allocated to actually perform the community center renovation? And vice versa. If the community center goes first, we need to make sure that we have enough funding to be able to perform the recreation center, or construct the recreation center. So that's the first recommendation. Right now, we have unfunded expenditures of $2 million. Now, this is just based off initial work that we've done with our financial advisor, but we have a couple options internally that we feel that we could do to address that deficit. The first one that Mr. Michael Maloney has proposed or stated, if you recall, with the local option bond, is we had roughly $16.1 million. Well, Michael, according to his numbers and what he believes in looking at bond sales, that we potentially can increase that up to $18 million. One of the items that we need to consider, and we're going to be talking about tomorrow night, is with local option, we're going to be going over the local option funds. If you recall, during the local option referendum for that, there's 3 eligible categories. One of them was indoor recreation center, community center, and roads, basically. We're going to cover local option tomorrow night along with the roads, and we'll discuss how much that we have allocated for the roads. But basically, to put it in a nutshell, if you look at that $16.1 million bonds over the course of 20 years, we believe that the funding that would be allocated just straight on a dollar-for-dollar basis allocated to roads, as well as the debt service on the indoor rec center and the community center, it's about the same. So it's about 50-50 over 20 years. If we increase that to $18 million to fund the community center and the recreation center, that would skew it to where more of the funding is allocated towards the indoor rec center and the community center than the city's roads. So that's something to consider. The other item that we have is under Iowa law is we could issue up to $900,000 for an individual project. Bond Council considers an individual project. One would be the indoor rec center. Another project separate and distinct would be the community center. So we could issue roughly $1.8 million in general obligation debt for these projects. They'd be 2 separate bond issues. They're subject to a reverse referendum on both of those items. So with those 2 bond issues, we could potentially get up to $2 million on it. A third item that we have is there's outstanding grant requests that we're aware of that may shore up some of this deficit that we have on it as well. We're not at liberty yet to talk about those yet, but there may be additional fundraising out there, and there's very likely could be on that. A fourth item that council always has, if you recall what we said, is council is always in charge of the size and scale of the projects. One item could be just to reduce the size and scale of these projects, particularly the rec center or the community center as well. The bottom line is, the first recommendation is this item when we consider a construction contract. So when we're talking about awarding a contract to firm X, Y, and Z, the first item that we have is this needs to equal this. That's our first recommendation. Our second recommendation is, and this plays into both the community center and the recreation center, and I'm going to preface my comments, we're very, very fortunate to have the private pledges that we have with these projects. If we didn't have the private projects, this would be a much different scenario and a much different size and scale on what's being proposed for both the rec center and the community center. But if we're going to be relying on private pledges, we really need to do an analysis of those private pledges. And where I'm going with this is if you look at the pledges, again, I'm very thankful that we have for both projects, but on these projects, they're likely to be constructed over 2 years. The pledges are likely to be paid over 5 years. So we have a timing difference, and we need to make sure that we can finance these projects. If it's internally at the city of Pella, we need to make sure we can handle it. And just so council's aware how this would actually work, is with the surplus cash. If you remember, we transferred roughly $1.3 million to date from the electric utility over to the city's long-term facilities fund. What we'll have to do when we do that, any future surplus cash transitions, is we'll go through, we'll do the calculation on the electric minimum fund balance. We'll go through that, and we'll come up with a calculation on available surplus cash. And then we'll make the transfer over up to $5 million. The question is if we're relying on pledges and the timing of these construction pledges, can we make the pledge amount of $5 million and also finance internal pledges as well? In the case of the rec center, it's $15 million. What we've been advised by legal counsel is if we're going to make interfund loans during this, we still need to make that same calculation on minimum fund balance wherever we're going with the money on it. So that's going to be a critical analysis on it. Not impossible on it. What we're stating is before we approve construction contracts, that's something that we need to discuss on this, is how we're financing the pledges on it. We want to make sure council's aware of that. So those would be our two recommendations that we have on it. And ultimately, our recommendation is we are supportive of both of these projects. We believe they're going to be outstanding amenities for our community on it as well. However, we also feel that it's important that we construct these projects in a fiscally responsible manner, and that's why our two recommendations are this, is simply this first item needs to balance, and if you wanted to take away the second item is, we need to make sure we can cash flow the construction on it as well. So, Mr. Mayor, that's our presentation on both the rec center, community center, University Street, and what's included in the 2025 budget. We'd be more than happy to answer anything the council may have on this item.
All right, thank you, Mike. It's a pretty exhaustive analysis of everything, so appreciate that. A lot of information. Are we done then for tonight?
Yes.
With our, okay, so council, any comments or questions related to basically anything we talked about tonight? Knowing we have another session tomorrow night before we actually probably dive deeper into tax rates and all that stuff, so.
Are you gonna share with us some idea of the cash flow to build the two projects and how much we have to cover in between?
We've done that. I'm not skirting the question, but what I'd like to do is before we do this, we've done the initial calculations that we have. One of the items, and I think the best way to say it is it's going to take a refined analysis, so we feel that before it comes out in the public measure that we really should talk about the larger pledges and the timing of it and have a better handle to make sure we're certain on the timing of those. So we'd be happy to talk in generalities on it, and I think it's a very good question, but don't mistake my message. When we're considering the construction contract, that information is going to have to come in front of council, and we intend to do that.
Okay, anyone else? Otherwise, listen up. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. I'm getting to the public comment section. That was council. I was making sure that council didn't have any other questions. So now, yeah, tonight we also want to give opportunity for any member of the public to make comments about whatever's been heard or whatever been talked about tonight. So I think if you want to do that, maybe just come over to this mic would be the easiest probably. We need to try to pick up the sound so that we can, the television part of this and everything. So if you want to come, as usual, please state your name, address, and work very hard to limit it to 3 minutes. We've been here for a long time, so.
Okay, Ann Summit, 1435 Hazel Street. I'm with Pella Preservation Trust, and I do need a lot of preservation at this point in my life, but anyway, it has been talked about having Pella become a certified local government, and over 90 communities and counties in the state of Iowa are certified local governments. And through this opportunity, you would be able to get a lot more grants for preservation and things. This could cover some of the memorial building things. It could cover some, maybe even on the community center. I just think it's something that we should be looking at very, very carefully. Ames, my understanding is they just got a huge grant and they redid their whole entire old downtown district's walks, intersections, all of that with this kind of money. So we're sitting here talking about not being able to fund the insurance, but maybe by funding renovation work, we could afford the insurance. So just something to think about. You have to have an historic group formed by the city, which we already have. So it's something to really, really start thinking about. I just kind of looked here, Oski and Newton have it already. So something to look at to help with preservation needs, because I definitely feel this city is a gem of preservation right now. And that's what brings Pella here too, and we need to support our retailers here. And a wise old First Chamber of Commerce director for the city of Pella said, as your downtown district and retailers go, so goes your community. So I think we need to keep that in mind.
So just a minute, we've got a group, as you stated.
What?
You stated we've got a group, step one.
Yes, you have a group, step
What's
one.
step two?
Okay, we have to start applying for, Lorinda Bradley, who spoke that time, she knows all about this type of thing. And so I was just sitting here looking at this really, really quickly. It has a guide here online from the Iowa culture.iowaeda.com. It tells you exactly how to go about getting the certification. And I think that might be very, very important to get grants.
Is that something that the Historic Preservation Trust can?
No, it has to come through the community, your trust
Yeah.
that you have established.
Oh, okay, so
through
that's
the
not
city.
that one.
Not
That-
ours.
That's
Not the nonprofit
but
one.
we do have a
Yeah, you do have
city-appointed
Right.
group. I say, is that who should initiate this?
Yes.
And
Okay,
they've been working on it. They've
Okay.
tried to bring it forward a few times, so I think
Okay.
it's something to look into.
okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Anyone else?
Dennis Fairchild, 1008 Park Lane. I believe we're allowed to ask questions. Is that correct, Mayor?
Sure,
Okay,
this is
thanks.
an informal,
This
but
is City Administrator. It looks like we're somewhere between $80,000 and $106,000 in new debt over the next 5 years. What is the exact number?
Excuse me, 80 to 100,000?
Or
It's a-
million? Yeah, 80 to 100 million in new debt in the next 5 years?
We'll have to get that, sir, as far as the debt over 5 years,
Okay.
the CIP.
For your budget, it looked like at least 80 million. Is that correct? For your proposed budgets?
I wouldn't state that as far as 80 million on
Okay.
it, so.
The next thing too is always have to discern this, but all the projections now for the rec center are based off base. So your budget is base. I'm not seeing any budgetary numbers for the full build. So the base is the 2 basketball courts in the competition swimming pool, correct? Okay, so does that mean the old pool still gets closed and we no longer have a community pool?
That is
Okay.
correct.
So the last thing too is, as we spoke, I love the budgetary process my first time, so I don't mean anything pointed here, just trying to get information. It appears that your budget also builds in a tax increase this year, as it has been for the preceding meetings, and it also has a built-in tax increase for next year. Is that correct?
What the budget has is there's projects included in the budget, roughly $8.3 million, that if council initiates those projects during the year and authorizes them, the debt service levy would go up by $1.15 for all of them. Yes.
So what you're proposing this year and next year has tax increases, is that correct?
The tax increase, what we're actually proposing and taking action on is $1075 for this year.
Right.
The budgetary amounts for future years for projects include $8.4 million in FY26, that if
Exactly.
council approves those, there could be a debt service
Yes,
levy
and
for
all those
those.
seem like pretty important projects. So, okay, and it also looked like from the deficits that there would be tax increases for the remaining 3 years in your budgetary process, is that correct?
As far as
You seem like the shortfalls were short going out to 2029 on the increase in the cost and the maximum amount that can be raised with the state limitations on the property tax.
Now, you're talking about two different things. As far as the operating standpoint, what we know for certain is 1075 for FY '25.
Right.
We think that the tax levy, from an operational standpoint, can be held consistent for 2026.
Okay.
2027, it's been my experience in 3 years, that's usually a wild card. But I would also like to state is, we've been doing budgets at the City of Pella for 22 years, and this is the first tax rate we've had in 22 years on it. And from our standpoint, each and every year that we've came up in front of it, we've always said is the third year is this, and a lot of things could happen, and we've been very good over the years. The City Council, rather, has been very good over the years is mitigating any type of tax rate increases.
Okay, perfect. That's my last question. I'd reached out to the mayor and council regarding proposed tax increases, and were we looking at any, and I know this is difficult, so I applaud everybody here, were we starting to look at any proposed reductions that we could make in our city budgets? I didn't see any of that in the presentations for this evening.
Yeah, that's always an option for the City Council to consider, not as a reduction in service levels on what we have. I will state for the record, as far as city services, what we have is, I think they're fairly efficient that we have, and that's attestation on, if you've looked at what's happened over the past 20 years maintaining the city rates. That's, frankly, I'm not aware of another city that's done that. And then in addition, from the general fund standpoint, we've also absorbed the community ambulance in the last 3 years as well, so.
Yeah, I do applaud the city, so in no way is this negative. As a community member, I'm just trying to determine, it looks like our taxes are going up. I'm trying just to determine how much and how long to fund the proposal. Thank you all very much for your service and everything you do.
Okay, anyone else?
Hi, I'm Paula Allen. I live at 408 Broadway Street. And first I want to thank you guys for everything you do. This was overwhelming. I had no idea what went all into this, so wow, thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Pickleball Club. We now have an official pickleball. And we appreciate you guys bringing up pickleball. So as you guys know, we've lost Kiwanis and we're leaning on Caldwell. We just want to know, you guys to know that we formed our club. We are now a nonprofit organization and we are working towards our 501c3, and we would like to partner with you guys on any upcoming projects. So we just wanted you to know we exist. And we look forward to the future and would like maybe some action steps from you guys to tell us what we can do to help build maybe some new designated courts, or what you guys see the future for pickleball to be. So, again, so just kind of let us know what we should be doing. And we appreciate you guys talking pickleball. So. We really do. I mean, it is a hugely growing sport in the town. It is an all-inclusive, generational sport. It is probably the most, I don't know, social sport I've ever been involved with. And we've got a lot of people. We have at least 150 people in our database, and that doesn't really include all the people that are really playing. And again, I think it is just a huge family sport. So anything you guys can do to keep it moving forward, and you guys know that we want a partnership with you guys, so let us know how we can help.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay.
I'll try to be brief. Harry Ehrlich, 725 Countryside Lane. First of all, I'd like to say a good, excellent presentation of the numbers. I went over to the city library today to look at the budget for a little while. And while I have a lot of detailed questions, that's okay. For two things that struck me. One, almost all the budgets are a hold-the-line budget in terms of all the service, supplies, commodities, all the things that it takes to operate and maintain the city. And I'm concerned that with inflation, et cetera, we're probably maybe falling behind. And one of the priorities at your priority session was to try to catch up and to do more maintenance in terms of the life cycle benefit of that. And so that's a concern I have. And that could be a one-year concern, or it might be a multiple year concern. Secondly, in the past, last year's sessions that you had, my position and my concern was, again, general obligation bonds financing, and we're tending to, with that $1.15 that was placed up there, and going forward, that's a significant hit on a lot of residents that are on fixed incomes. I'm on a fixed income as a retiree, but I can afford it myself personally. But I think there's a lot of folks in the town that may be a concern. And thirdly, I'm going to give a pitch that I think the 2% for staff is very conservative. When we looked at it, I got more than that as a Social Security recipient, and I think that you ought to rethink that, possibly a little bit higher across the board for the staffs having 37 years of experience on that side and having to balance budgets, et cetera. I can understand, but I would just make that suggestion. If you can find another 150,000 or some number in your budget, that a little bit larger compensation adjustment would be an appropriate thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Van Strylen, Hopkins. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Reindeerhorst. Butler.
Yes.